Chapter 12:37. Dean slowly closed his eyes, and the body structure of the extreme ice worm king appeared in his mind. In the next moment, his body split into a mass of flesh and blood, and it kept changing. After 10 minutes, the mass of flesh and blood gradually changed into the appearance of the extreme ice worm king. When the last step was completed, an ice worm king appeared in front of Dean. When the connection was cut off, its body also stopped moving, as if it was dead. Dean didn't input the memory into it. He didn't need the ice worm king to work for him. He just needed to use its body to bring strength to Noise and others and enhance their combat effectiveness. Creating legendary soul worms, extreme ice worms, and extreme ice worm king, which was also known as source worms, Dean's construction speed was getting faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, he had created a set of resources that could allow people to evolve from the abyss to the king stage. Dean handed Noise over to Noise. He wanted Noise to be the first king. With his help, Noise quickly absorbed the legendary soul worm and evolved his cells. He then absorbed the extreme ice worm and quickly climbed from the lower abyss to the upper abyss. Due to the rapid advancement, Noise didn't have time to eliminate the impurities that were brought to his body by the soul worm. In less than half an hour, Noise successfully advanced to king level after absorbing 2 soul worms. Moreover, unlike other kings, Noise consciousness wouldn't be disturbed by the ice worm king. He would always be free. This exaggerated scene left everyone dumbfounded. It was as if they were watching a show. They were completely dumbfounded. Dean let Noise use his strength to attack him. After testing, it proved that Noise indeed had the strength of a king. However, he was very unfamiliar with using it. He hadn't fully controlled the power in his body. Mass production of king level. This is the ability of a god. No wonder the origami and the magic insects are searching for a god. Once they become a god, what can't be solved? Dean was happy, but he couldn't help but sigh. On that day, he asked Goddess Wa to help him. The two of them made soul worms and source worms together. With Dean's speed, he could construct a set of all the resources needed to evolve to the king level every half an hour or so. Goddess Wa only needed 5 or 6 minutes, and her speed was gradually increasing. Dean didn't allow the king level to proliferate. He promoted Aurora, Noise, Sergei and the others to the king level. As for their cronies, they were given to them to train in the future. Dean thought about the memories he got from the manager of the merchant house. The demon emperor did come back to the imperial capital. As for whether he left or not, it was something that the manager didn't know. He got up and left the merchant house. He took Noise and the others to the imperial capital. The demon kings had fallen, and the demon emperors had secluded themselves in the royal palace. Currently, all kinds of dragons and snakes were rising up in the imperial capital. The Abyss Masters under the command of the demon kings, and the Abyss Masters of some ancient families, had all appeared to investigate the situation and attempt to seize the territories left behind by the demon kings. Although the banners of the demon kings were still flying high, the armies and businesses under them had already been torn apart, and there was endless internal strife. After the demon emperor returned, he took action to suppress the turmoil in the imperial capital. However, after that, he stayed in the royal palace for a long time, causing rumors and slanders to spread everywhere. The various experts were still restless. There's only one king left in the imperial capital. He's the only king who didn't participate in the Federation War. After the demon emperor is killed, the imperial capital will be a group of dragons without a leader. In Dean's eyes, there was no difference between a king and an ordinary person. His vision and mind had become more open after helping Noise and the others to evolve their bodies. He had the aura of overlooking everything in the world. Ordinary people cultivated their temperament with their clothes. Rulers cultivated their temperament with their wealth and power. Emperors cultivated their temperament with their territory. Dean led Noise and the others to the palace. He spread his perception domain to perceive the daily scenes of the imperial capital. 2 hours later they came to the central core area of the imperial capital, the imperial city. Standing outside the city, Dean's perception extended forward and covered the entire imperial city. Soon he felt that the scene in the imperial city was different from the past. It was slightly chaotic. He heard a lot of secret conversations of families and saw a lot of dirty things. Everyone's privacy was exposed in front of his eyes, but he didn't feel it. Dean saw the palace in the center of the imperial city. Everything was in order. Is he still here? Dean's eyes flashed. He thought that the demon emperor would escape and stay far away from the imperial capital. After all, the demon emperor didn't even care about the Federation's army when he retreated. But now the imperial palace was heavily guarded and there was no sign of chaos. It could be seen that the demon emperor was still inside. Dean suddenly understood that the reason why the demon emperor abandoned the Federation's army was because he knew that he wouldn't have time to manage the imperial capital. Moreover, the imperial capital would be in turmoil after losing the rule of the 7 kings. If the demon emperor brought a large number of troops back, then the turmoil would become more intense. Even before the demon emperor attacked the imperial capital, there would be an extremely unbearable situation. If that was the case, then Dean had to admire the determination of the devil emperor. He was a ruthless person. Let me see what gives you the confidence to sit in the imperial capital. Dudien's eyes flashed as he strode forward. They entered the imperial city and went all the way to the imperial palace. Dean's perception penetrated all over the imperial palace. He saw a metal spaceship buried deep in the ground. His perception couldn't penetrate into the spaceship, but he searched the entire palace. He only saw a few concubines. He didn't see the shadow of the demon emperor. It seemed that the demon emperor was hiding in the spaceship. Was it a trap or an evasion? Dean didn't rush to attack but looked at Noyce. Go to the imperial palace and grab me 2 concubines of the demon emperor. Noyce was stunned. This was the core of the imperial capital. The strongest person in the imperial capital lived there. He was also the ruler of the giant wall. But he wanted to go to the palace where the demon emperor lived and grab his concubines? Noyce was surprised, but he quickly nodded as he thought about Dean. His figure disappeared from the place. He passed through the guards in front of the imperial palace and went to the depths of the palace. After a while, there was some chaos in the imperial palace. Then, Noyce's figure turned back, carrying 2 women who were dressed extremely luxuriously. Even their accessories were extremely luxurious. Both of them were in their early 20s. They were breathtakingly beautiful. There was a special pattern on their faces. Their eyes were indifferent and arrogant. They didn't seem to have any emotion. Although they were embarrassed after being thrown to the ground by Noyce, they soon raised their proud heads. There was a bit of anger on their beautiful and enchanting faces. They glared at Dean. Who are you? How dare you break into the imperial palace? Take off your human skin, Dudian indifferently said. He raised his hand and slapped. His 5 fingers were like several sharp blades that slashed out, leaving bloody marks on the 2 women's bodies. Sensing that their lives were in danger, the pupils of the 2 girls constricted. Their clothes were suddenly torn apart, and their bodies expanded, raising a stinky wind like a hurricane. In the blink of an eye, they turned into 2 monsters more than 10 meters tall. Messy tentacles covered their bodies, hideous eyeballs and disordered mouths were everywhere. They were even more horrifying than most of the monsters that were known for their horrifying appearances. They were as beautiful as a god but as ugly as a devil. Noyce, who had personally captured them, was shocked. He didn't expect these 2 beautiful women to be such terrifying and disgusting monsters. Aurora and the others all retreated in fright, frightened by this terrifying image. Dean had seen the true face of the origami from the memories of Crimson Moon, Lin Chongqing, and Bioello. He was not surprised at this moment and was indifferent. He smiled faintly and said, In your origami race, your image should be considered as beautiful, right? The two origami let out a sharp and ear-piercing cry. It sounded like they were roaring as they pounced towards Dean. Dean's expression was indifferent. He raised his hand and his fingers turned into two giant cages. The two origami were imprisoned in the cages. Several giant thorns came out from the cages and pierced into the bodies of the two origami. It didn't take long for him to read the memories of the two origami. Sure enough, you're back. Dean threw the two origami to Goddess Wa. Here you go. Goddess Wa smiled and raised her hand. Her slender palm became bigger like a strange mouth. There was a bottomless whirlpool in the center of her palm. Dense teeth could be faintly seen. The two origami were sucked into the whirlpool. After a moment, her arm returned to its original shape. Dismantle the spaceship, Dean said to God of Wa. From the memory of the two origami, Dean knew that the Demon Emperor was hiding inside the spaceship. With the Demon Emperor's plan, he wouldn't expect a spaceship to be able to protect him. It was most likely a trap. Dean's strength was not the same as before, but he wasn't blindly confident. There were many things that happened when the ship was overturned. Chapter 12:38. Oh, God of War responded. It seemed that Dean had asked her to do a trivial matter. She lightly jumped and landed outside the walls of the Imperial Palace. When the guards at the gate saw Goddess Wa descending from the sky, they were stunned by her beautiful face. It took them a while to react. When one of the guards was about to step forward and ask for her identity, he saw the beautiful girl raise her hand, and her arms suddenly expanded. Her snow-white arm turned into a blood-red limb that looked like it was cast from lava, looking hideous and horrible. Bang! God of Wa slapped down with her gigantic arm. The walls of the palace collapsed and the dust rose. Her arm was like an iron lock that penetrated through the ground. She touched the ancient spaceship in the depths of the Imperial Palace. Her arm turned into a soft rubber that wrapped around the spaceship and pulled it up. The buildings on the ground trembled violently. The entire Imperial Palace and even the entire Imperial City felt the vibration. Soon, a ring-shaped spaceship was pulled out of the dust and was thrown to the ground next to the Imperial Palace. Noyce and others were shocked. They didn't expect that the silent girl who followed Dean would have such a terrifying power. How many tons of power would it take to pull such a huge spaceship out of the ground? Puff! The thin, soft tissues wrapped around the spaceship shrunk rapidly, turning into sharp blades that pierced out fiercely. The spaceship was hit by the sharp blades. Sparks sputtered out. There were a few dents on the surface of the spaceship, but it didn't break. Goddess Wa was a little surprised. Suddenly, one of the sharp blades turned into a soft liquid and covered the spaceship. A moment later, the soft liquid turned back into a sharp blade and shot out again, piercing a hole in the metal shell of the spaceship. Seeing that it was effective, a cold glint flashed across the surface of the other blades, and they stabbed forward again. The surface of the spaceship lit up with a blue fluorescent light. It was like a protective shield that blocked the countless blades. However, it didn't last long before it broke. However, the power of the blades was greatly reduced after being blocked by the protective shield. At this moment, a sinister voice came from the spaceship. I don't want to be your enemy. Don't bully me too much. If you really force me into a dead end, even if I die, I'll drag you down with me. Dean couldn't help but feel strange. Didn't you know that I would come? Isn't it too late to say these words? If you had taken the initiative to surrender to me, then maybe I would have spared your life. Submit? Dream on. The Demon Emperor said angrily. I don't want to be your enemy, so you'd better not provoke me. On the way here, didn't you look around? I've buried nuclear weapons in every corner of the Imperial City. This is something you humans invented. Once I detonate them, the entire Imperial City will fall. With such a large area, you can't escape. Dean used his perception to penetrate into the nearby corners of the ground. He saw that there were nuclear weapons scattered in different locations. He only paid attention to the surface and ignored them. After all, he didn't think that the demon emperor would drag the entire imperial city to be buried with him. "Do you think nuclear bombs are useful against a god?" Dean indifferently said. "I thought that you would prepare some means to deal with it. I didn't expect that it would be such a boring thing." "So you don't want to let me go?" The demon emperor gritted his teeth. "Then let's die together." Dean frowned. He could guess the demon emperor's plan through the layout of the surroundings. It was obvious that there were nuclear weapons buried in the spaceship. The demon emperor would be the first to bear the brunt of the nuclear bomb once it was detonated. He would be in the center of the explosion and would have to bear the high temperature of hundreds of millions of degrees. Everything on the Earth would be melted in front of such temperature. Even a god would be seriously injured or even killed. However, the effect would be different if he was prepared. "Be careful." Dean didn't have time to dictate to Goddess Wa, so he used telepathy to pass a message to her. As soon as Goddess Wa received the message, her entire body was covered with a large amount of scarlet magma-like carapace, like a blood-red lotus, covering her body layer by layer. Boom! There wasn't any warning as the explosion echoed. Dean spread out a large number of tentacles to pull Noise and the others behind the giant lotus. Nevertheless, the impact of the explosion made Dean's heart contract. They were very close to the spaceship at the moment. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they were in the center of the nuclear weapons. It was the first time that he was so close to the nuclear weapons. It was as if he was facing the god of death. All of this happened in an instant. Dean had just passed the message when the demon emperor's voice fell. Dazzling light burst out and illuminated the world like it was daytime. It was as if a flame had risen and erupted on the planet. Countless people in the imperial city looked up in shock. When the scorching white light pierced through heaven and earth, it also pierced through their retinas. Countless people's eyes began to tear and bleed. Before they could even cry out in pain, the ground began to rumble. It was as if a huge wave was pushing against them. All of their senses were instantly numbed, and they lost all sense of perception. Boom! A huge mushroom cloud exploded in the imperial city. The violent tremors could be felt by all the cities in the imperial capital. Countless people looked towards the imperial capital, the place where the sovereign reigned over the world. They could see a flash of light erupting from the horizon. Even if they were hundreds of miles away, they could still see that the sky was illuminated with a blazing white light. At this moment, the entire imperial capital, which was filled with turbulent undercurrents, fell into silence. Everyone was shocked by this huge tremor. A tall figure wearing a hat was on the top of a mountain dozens of miles away from the imperial city. He raised his hand to cover his eyes as he squinted at the blooming white sun in front of him. The mushroom cloud slowly rose and a gust of wind blew away the hood covering his face. A handsome face was revealed. It was a face that everyone in the imperial city knew. "I didn't expect that the first god born on Earth would be so close to a human. Moreover, this kid seems to have obtained Lin Chongsheng's memory and become a quasi-god." He muttered to himself and then sneered. "Millions of people will accompany you to be buried. You won't be a disgrace to your identity as a quasi-god. As for this god, even if nuclear weapons can't kill you, we can wait for our fleet to come and destroy this planet. The power of the planet's explosion should be enough to bury a god who hasn't grown up yet. I'm already a quasi-god. Even if I don't have this planet, I can slowly improve in the future. Sooner or later I will evolve into a god. My race will rule this universe. We won't die because of hunger. We will become eternal." Chapter 1239. Rumble. The earth trembled and shook violently. The incandescent pillar of light enveloped the entire imperial city. When the pillar of light dissipated, all that was left was a huge mushroom cloud that rose into the sky and a cloud of smoke that covered the sun. The once flourishing imperial city that countless citizens of the imperial capital felt extremely glorious when they visited had been razed to the ground under the cloud of dust. All that was left was scorched earth, like a bloody wound that had been torn open in the earth. Smoke and blood were rising from the wound. Vibration, violent vibration. Dean could feel that all the soil above and around his head was contracting and trembling. It was like a frightened animal was shrinking its pores. In addition, the blazing heat swept over from all directions, completely filling and enveloping his senses. It was as if he was bathed in a pool of boiling hot blood. At this moment, he felt so insignificant. Compared to the entire earth, he was like a mosquito on a human body, or not even a mosquito, but a tiny bacterium. The mechanical heart in his chest was operating at full speed. He could almost hear the buzzing sound of the mechanical heart. The tissues outside his body were frantically splitting and reassembling, spewing out blazing flames that mixed with the temperature of the outside world. He did not create ice to weaken this terrifying temperature. Otherwise, the constantly melting ice would turn into steam, and even Noyce and the others would be cooked. On the contrary, he used low-temperature flames to gradually resist the terrifying temperature of the nuclear explosion. He mechanically created new bodies to resist the high temperature. He didn't know how much time had passed, but the temperature gradually decreased. At the same time, Dean felt that Goddess Wa had taken them to a very deep place in the ground. They were far away from the center of the nuclear explosion. Dean asked Wa to take them to another place after the situation gradually calmed down. Whoosh! The lotus leaf-like tentacle of Goddess Wa wrapped around Dean, Noyce and the others. It moved forward rapidly and appeared in a rock formation hundreds of miles away from the ground. A scorching wind blew as they came to the surface. Noyce and others who were under Dean's shelter felt as if they were inhaling flames. They coughed violently. Dean looked at the green space outside the Imperial City from the distance, but at the moment it was scorched earth. His vision shifted to the nuclear explosion area. The high temperature in the air became distorted. The entire Imperial City had disappeared, leaving behind only a piece of scorched earth that had not grown a single blade of grass for decades. Dean was startled. Even he was surprised by the Demon Emperor's generosity. He felt that he was too narrow-minded. If he was a bit bigger then, he might be able to think of this point. However, he knew the potential of God of Wa. So he didn't panic when he found the missiles buried in the city. The explosion of the nuclear bomb wasn't much of a threat to him. But it was a pity for the Imperial City. This was the lair of the Demon Emperor. No one knew how many secrets of the Wildness God were buried here. But now they were all gone along with the people of the city. "Are you okay?" Dean looked at God of Wa, who was still in the lotus shape. Hearing this, Goddess Wa retracted a few lotus leaves and revealed a huge snow-white face. She said obediently, "I'm fine. It's a pity that this thing exploded too fast. If it were a little slower, I would have absorbed and eaten it all. It must be delicious." Dean was stunned. Swallowing the nuclear bomb? He thought about it carefully. He felt that what God of Wa said wasn't completely impossible. As long as the speed of energy absorption could catch up with the speed of the explosion, then they could synchronize the conversion. But it was difficult. It was impossible for him. After all, the mechanical heart had its limit. But God of Wa was a true god. She had infinite potential. Perhaps she could do it if she practiced more. God is a terrible thing. Dean was surprised. He turned around and used his X-ray vision to check the situation. He found that only 2 of Aurora's cronies were far away. They didn't have enough time to reach God of Wa. The rest of the people were basically fine. They just had some burns. The entire Imperial City is gone. Oh my God! Teacher, is this the work of the Demon Emperor who ruled the giant wall? Noyce and the others looked around and saw the mountains and forests in the distance. They vaguely recognized where they were and were shocked. The Imperial City had left a deep impression on them. It was gorgeous, majestic, and magnificent. But now there was nothing left except for the scorched earth. Such a move was simply destructive. Dean nodded. He felt that there was a trace of strangeness. It seemed that he had overlooked something. Using tens of millions of people in the imperial city to accompany me in death. Although this demon emperor's actions were generous and fitting of his identity, his actions before his death were a little strange. Dean recalled the previous event. The demon emperor's performance was slightly impetuous. He didn't have the calm demeanor of a strategist. Of course, it might be because he was forced into a desperate situation and exposed his camouflage nature. Many people were calm because they didn't have the strength to do so. But the strange thing was that with this demon emperor's personality, there was no way that she would stay here and wait for death, perishing together with him. After all, even if nuclear bombs could scare him off this time, what about the second time? It wasn't a long-term solution. If he was the demon emperor, then he would never use such a stupid means to save his life. The demon emperor didn't admit defeat during the negotiation. He was so tough, but his final means was to die together. This feeling, it was as if he didn't plan to live and was ready to detonate the nuclear bomb. If that was the case, then why did he say those meaningless words to expose his thoughts? If the nuclear bomb exploded without warning, then the damage to him would be more serious, and he might even be killed. Dean woke up as he thought about all kinds of strange things. Maybe the self-destructing demon emperor was just a recording or a stand-in. The real demon emperor wasn't dead yet. He looked up and swept around. His perception swept out and covered the nearby mountains and forests. If the demon emperor wasn't dead, then he would pay attention to the situation here. His perception domain expanded to the extreme and locked all the animals within hundreds of miles. But he didn't sense the aura of the demon emperor. What a cautious fellow. Has he already left? He even erased his scent. Dean's eyes lit up as he retracted his perception network. In any case, he was 100% sure that the demon emperor wasn't dead. Since he wasn't dead, then he must be hiding in the dark to continue his plan. All the concubines in the imperial city are origami. It seems that the demon emperor isn't the only one in the origami family. There must be a mother seed to continue the future generations. Dean's eyes lit up as he pondered for a moment. He temporarily suppressed the investigation of the Devil Emperor. The latter was hiding in the dark and had extraordinary wisdom. It was almost impossible to find him. It was better to finish his own business first. Now the Demon Emperor had retreated and the imperial capital had almost fallen into his hands. The world of the earth was almost in his hand. I'll train a group of kings in my spare time after I find Aisha. I don't believe that I can't find the trace of the Demon Emperor. Dean didn't care even if he couldn't find the Demon Emperor. After all, it was almost impossible to assassinate the Demon Emperor with his current identity. Even if the Demon Emperor used the power of science and technology to launch long-range weapons like intercontinental missiles to attack the area where he was located, it wouldn't be able to hurt him. He just needed to enjoy the fruits of his victory. He would send people to track down the Demon Emperor and make the latter a stray dog hiding in the shadows until it was unbearable. He felt the trace of unhappiness in his heart dissipate. He turned around and left with Noise, God of Wa, and the others to recover the entire imperial capital. He wanted to finish at the end of the month and take a week off next month to start a new book. But it seemed that he couldn't rest. Chapter 1240. Dean gave the task of recovering the imperial capital to Noise and Aurora, not only to train them but also because he didn't have time to manage these trivial matters. He parted ways with Noise and others after leaving the imperial capital. He went to find the last king of the imperial capital. Are you the tyrant king? Dean and Vaiwa appeared in the king's castle. They were like transparent shadows that penetrated through the window of the king's study room. Sitting in the study was a tall and slender blonde youth. His cheeks were handsome and long, and he looked a little mean. His light red eyes were very calm, and his whole body had the elegance of a noble. He did not live up to his reputation of being fierce and fierce. "Who are you?" The golden-haired young man raised his eyes slightly, and a hint of seriousness flashed in his eyes. To be able to sneak past the detection of his guards and arrive here, even if he wasn't a king tier, he wouldn't be far from it. "Let me take a look at your little head." Dean raised his hand. His palm was getting bigger and bigger in front of the blond youth's eyes. "Courting death." The blond youth's eyes flashed red. Among the 7 kings, he was the most easily angered, so he had such a nickname. Dean's unauthorized intrusion had already angered him, but now he took the initiative to attack. He felt that he was about to lose his mind. His whole body bulged, and the aristocratic dress on the outside was instantly torn, revealing his huge demonic body. However, several sharp blades suddenly shot out from the palm that was stretching toward him. They were as fast as light beams. Before he could see them clearly, they had already pierced through his neck, shoulder blades, ribs, chest, and other parts of his body. In particular, one of the sharp blades had pierced through half an inch from his heart. If he moved slightly, his beating heart would be cut open. The blond youth's pupils shrank. There was a look of disbelief in his eyes. Such a fast change of body didn't conform to his logic at all. "Be quiet if you don't want to die," Dean indifferently said. The blond youth was easily out of control, but he was able to control his anger in some moments. For example, he was facing the King of Light and the Devil. At this moment, feeling that his life was no longer under his control, he quickly controlled his anger. Thinking of the tremors from before, his expression changed. "The tremors from before were caused by you? That's because the devil wanted to perish together with me. Unfortunately, he couldn't do it," Dean indifferently said. The golden-haired youth was stunned. This sentence contained too much information, and it was too shocking. Dean didn't pay attention to his shock. He extended his tentacles and plunged into his brain to read his memories. A moment later, he retracted his tentacles and the sharp blades that were stabbed into the origami's body. He furrowed his brows. He did not expect the demon emperor to have hidden himself so deeply. Even the king did not know about his secrets, let alone the whereabouts of the other origami. This tyrant king was just like the other kings. He was just a slave of the demon emperor. The true servant was the extreme ice bug king in their heads. "From now on, you will follow me." Dean felt a little bored and told him. The tyrant king's eyes were sluggish for a moment. He gradually recovered and respectfully said, "Yes, sir. Thank you for helping me get rid of that abominable extreme ice bug king." "I didn't help you get rid of it. I just erased its consciousness," Dean said indifferently. In addition to going through the memories, he had also entered some new memories into the mind of the tyrant king. For example, he told him that he had helped the tyrant erase the consciousness of the extreme ice worm king and what had happened in the imperial city. The fastest way to make people surrender was to let them see your strength. "Sir, I am willing to pledge my loyalty to you." The tyrant king knelt down on one knee. This was the etiquette to meet the demon emperor. From the memories given by Dean, he saw the demon emperor die in the imperial city. He also saw Dean's extraordinary strength. At this moment, he did not feel wrong to treat Dean with such etiquette. "The imperial city is in chaos now. Go and help my friends to suppress the imperial city. Restore order as soon as possible," Dean said. "Yes, sir." The tyrant king nodded respectfully. However, he sighed in his heart. He had just bid farewell to the demon emperor and now he had to welcome a new master. He was always being ridden on the neck. It was difficult to turn the situation around. It was a pity that he could do nothing about it. The aftershocks of the nuclear explosion spread throughout the imperial city. All the forces immediately launched the intelligence network to contact the spies in the imperial city to inquire about the situation. However, there was no news. Therefore, they had to send new spies to the imperial city to inquire about the situation. Just as the various powers were gathering, there was suddenly news that a deity had descended and killed a great emperor. The great emperor had committed a heinous crime. He had offended the god and was punished by the wrath of the god. The great emperor had committed a heinous crime. At first, people did not believe it. However, the news that the imperial city had been razed to the ground spread. At the same time, there was more evidence to prove that the imperial city had disappeared. For a time, the entire imperial city was in an uproar. Everyone was shocked by this shocking news. It was equivalent to the people of a country suddenly hearing that their capital had disappeared. Without the capital, there would be no great emperor and countless upper-class nobles who maintained the country. Thinking of such an outcome, not only did the commoners not feel happy about regaining their freedom, but they were also anxious. Like homeless orphans, they felt uneasy and hoped that some big shot would appear above them to lead them and point them in a new direction. Soon, such a person appeared. Noyce and others arrived with the attitude of a king and suppressed all sides. All the forces that were ready to make a move fiercely resisted. They used all means to fight back against Noyce and others. They even created public opinion to win the will of the people. They created all kinds of rumors and so on. However, the strongest of the giants in the imperial city was the Lord of the Abyss. Under the suppression of the absolute strength of Noyce and others, they quickly became obedient. Some of them took the initiative to surrender while others vowed to die. They fought against the soldiers under their command. In the end, they were slaughtered. There were also some ancient families who were unwilling to be suppressed and replaced in such a turbulent time. They used all the resources of their families to fight back, but in the end their entire families were erased and completely exterminated. When one of the former 7 kings, the tyrant king, appeared to protect the new king, all the forces in the imperial city knew that the situation had come to an end. These kings had joined forces and they no longer had a chance. The bloodbath and massacre continued for half a month. The entire imperial capital was shrouded in a hazy blood-red color. The aristocratic families were wiped out one after another. The military leaders who held great power were unwilling to surrender and were sent to the guillotine. The entire imperial city was trembling. The old master and the new master were replaced. It was destined to be a bloodbath. Even ordinary civilians didn't dare to go on the street. Many academies even closed their doors. Some academies organized students to resist, but they were also mercilessly suppressed. Bloody and brutal, the suppression of the imperial city was far more violent than that of the Federation. Everything was bloody and undisguised. In the continuous slaughter, the voices of resistance gradually disappeared, and the voices of doubt also stopped appearing. Everyone was very careful with what they said. Even the inexperienced children knew what to say and what not to say. They didn't even dare to ask questions, because that would invite a beating from their parents. People would forget a topic after a long time after it became taboo. It was as if it never existed. This bloody and dark history was destined not to be recorded. 20 days later, the order in the imperial city had been restored. There were very few voices of dispute. Noyce, Aurora, Mason and others were kings. They raised their flags and took over the former 7 kings' forces and territories. Dean asked Noyce and others to send messages to the giant wall after the order in the imperial city was restored. At the same time, the imperial army was sent to the abyss to search for traces of Aisha. He personally drew a portrait of Aisha. His extraordinary body control made the painting lifelike. It was as if the painting came to life. This painting also spread throughout the imperial capital, and she became the most famous woman in the imperial capital in a short time. /3_3610/ Chapter 1241. Noyce and the others used their status as the king as an example. They led the army to open up the abyss and look for traces of Aisha. Other independent adventurer organizations were also involved in the search for Aisha. There was no other reason but that this was a mission issued by the new emperor of the empire. The reward was so generous that countless people were jealous. No one could resist. In addition to the reward of a city, they would help to fulfill a wish. Any wish including resurrection of the dead. In addition, the person who completed the task would become the king of all living beings. Whether it was the thugs who pursued power and wealth or the people who had no desires, it was difficult to resist such temptation. Who in this world didn't have a wish and obsession to fulfill? In addition to the imperial capital, Wyvern patrollers took the portrait and Dean's mission to the giant wall. They spread the news to every inhabited corner of the empire. Even the walls surrounding the empire were the first to receive the news. Once there was a trace of the person in the portrait, they would immediately intercept it and report it to the higher-up. On the first day of the task, Dean received the news that someone had found the man in the painting. When the news came, he was so excited that he almost jumped up. He immediately went to greet them and saw a few nervous and timid adventurers standing in the hall of the newly built imperial palace. Beside them was a metal cage, and inside it was a graceful figure in ragged clothes who was wrapped in chains. Aisha. Dean was startled. He found that it wasn't Aisha. Although the appearance was 70% or 80% similar, but the smell was completely different. There was no bloodline power of the Demon Dragon clan in her body. "Is this the person you are looking for?" Dean asked straightforwardly. His boiling heart had cooled down. There was a bit of killing intent in his voice. The adventurers shivered as they were stared at by Dean's majestic eyes. One of them braced himself and said, "Reporting back to the Emperor, this is the person we found in the painting." "Shit!" Dean roared as he waved his hand. Several people in the hall turned into powder. Nothing was left. They didn't even have time to scream or react. After killing a few people, Dudian raised his hand and smashed the unconscious undead in the metal cage. Together with the cage, they were flattened. Noyce and Mason didn't expect Dean to be so angry. They rarely saw Dean in such a big temper. Even if he was in a dangerous situation, he wouldn't be so out of control and angry. He wouldn't easily kill people. Although the number of people who died in Dean's hands was uncountable, but Dean's principle of killing people was to benefit himself and not to kill innocent people. Dudien's anger hadn't dissipated yet. He shouted at the two, "If anyone doesn't wipe their eyes and bring this garbage to the prize, they will be punished with death by 1,000 cuts." Noyce was shocked as he didn't expect Dean's anger to spread to them. He faintly felt that Dean was slightly different from the Dean he used to follow. But he couldn't tell the specific difference. "Yes," he hurriedly replied. Dean saw that he was about to leave, but suddenly called out, "Wait." Noyce quickly stopped. Dean frowned. The anger in his heart had subsided. He thought for a moment and shook his head. "Forget it. Some people are not deliberately pretending to receive the prize. If we are too harsh, they will be scared off. If they really meet her, they may not dare to confirm that they have met the real person and dare not come to report." Noyce nodded. "I think so too." Dean looked at him. "Block the news of today's matter. Don't spread it out." "I will," Noyce replied. Dean nodded and left the hall. He returned to his study room. The next day there was another news. Dean's excitement was extinguished once again as he saw that it wasn't the real Aisha. But he didn't get angry this time. He just asked Noyce to give him some gold coins. There was news almost every day for several days. But without exception none of them were the real Aisha. Dean gradually lost his patience. He didn't have much expectation when he heard the news again. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. Aisha still hadn't been found. There wasn't even a trace of her. But on this day the special envoy of the Fire Dragon country came to the imperial capital. Dean greeted him, and the envoy immediately stated the reason. It was to express allegiance to the Chelan king of the Fire Dragon country. The Fire Dragon country was willing to submit to him unconditionally. Noyce and others were shocked as the news came out. especially the tyrant king. The Fire Dragon country bordered their border, and they had been in conflict for more than 200 years. They had never backed down. He was worried that the Fire Dragon country would send troops to invade the imperial capital after the death of the demon emperor. He didn't expect to receive a letter of surrender. "Your Majesty, is it a trap?" Noyce was the first to ask. He had learned to change the way he addressed Dean. He didn't call Dean young master anymore. He was keenly aware that the Dean in front of him wasn't the young master of the past. He was a real cold-blooded and cruel emperor. Dudian raised his hand and grabbed the envoy. He didn't wait for the envoy to resist as he forcibly explored the envoy's memory. Soon he saw the Chelan king's memory. He also saw the Chelan king's expression when he passed the order. What surprised him was that the latter's attitude was very respectful when he passed the order. It seemed that the latter's eyes weren't looking at the envoy who was in front of him, but at Dean who was looking at the envoy's memory. Moreover, after the Chelan Dragon King had passed down the order, he also recited the language of the magic worm in the form of a tone. It was a greeting to Dean, expressing his sincere intention to surrender. Dean retracted his tentacles and shook off the envoy. His eyes flashed with a cold light. It seemed that the envoy knew his situation very well. Perhaps the Chelan king was there during the Federation War, but he was hiding in the dark. "Emperor!" The envoy's face was pale. He stood up tremblingly and looked at Dean in horror. Dean coldly snorted. "Go back and tell the little dragon not to act smart. Hand over the military power of the Fire Dragon country and let the Imperial Army take over." The envoy's face changed. He wanted to say something, but Dean swept him out of the hall. Dean asked Noyce after the Fire Dragon envoy left, "Haven't found Aisha? Have you searched all the places?" "Not yet." Noyce felt Dean's gaze. He didn't dare to look directly at Dean's eyes. He bowed his head. "Most of the areas have been searched. I've found many monsters and undeads. I've also found some corpses that have learned the human language. There are only a few taboo places that haven't been explored. Even the king doesn't dare to step into those places." Chapter 1242. Dean frowned as he thought of the forest of despair outside the giant wall. The mutated plants that inhabited the underground had almost cost him his life. Most of the plants had deformed or mutated into new species due to environmental factors such as soil and air radiation. Some mutated plants had simple consciousness. They were bloodthirsty and ferocious. They would hunt like monsters. The probability of the birth of such plants was 1 in a billion. But every plant that was born would become a huge hidden danger. Whether it was humans or monsters, they didn't care about the plants around them. It provided a natural umbrella for them when they were young. It allowed them to attack the monsters and humans passing by. In addition, they could absorb nutrients from the soil. They would never lack food. Every area where plants were active was marked as a life forbidden zone by the Empire. The Forest of Despair outside the giant wall was one of them. Trivial forbidden zones dare to stop my footstep. Gather fire energy warriors and flatten all the forbidden zones. Dudian frowned as he said in a cold tone. He wanted to flatten all the forbidden zones that the Devil Emperor didn't bother to clean up. The whole world was under his feet, so what was a mere forbidden zone? Noyce was startled. "Yes. If we can't find any news of her within a week, then reduce the army by 30% and send her to hard labor." Dudian looked at Noyce mercilessly. Noyce felt great pressure. "Yes, Your Majesty, I understand." After leaving the hall, Noyce felt a little lighter. He was relieved from the extremely uncomfortable and severe pressure. He sighed and secretly smiled. He walked out of the Imperial Palace. As soon as he came outside the wall, he saw Macon hurriedly coming. "Is there any news?" Noyce's eyes lit up as he asked. Macon was stunned. He shook his head and smiled. "No, I just came to ask about the transfer of the border guards." Noyce was startled. I advise you to wait for such a small matter. He is in a bad mood. Mason looked at him and asked, What happened? Did he lose his temper again? If he can't find Miss Aisha, he will reduce the number by 30%. Noyce smiled bitterly. Macon smiled. It's just disarmament. It's not a big deal. The whole world is ours. It's useless to have an army. Noyce opened his mouth slightly, wanting to say something but hesitated. Finally, he said in a deep voice, This world is won by him, not by us. You'd better not say such things in the future. Macon was stunned and somewhat puzzled. Noyce didn't say anything and left in a hurry. Macon stood in the same place, looking at his back as he left. He slowly frowned thoughtfully. In the blink of an eye, a week had passed. The imperial capital gathered a large number of troops, led by Noyce, Macon, Barton, Aurora, Tyrant, and other kings, to destroy one forbidden zone after another. Although these life-forbidden zones were dangerous, and even kings had to be careful when venturing into them alone, even a demigod like the Demon Emperor had to temporarily avoid being bombarded by so many kings and a large number of troops. The kings of the empire led the cavalry to sweep through the major life-forbidden zones. Finally, they found the news about Aisha in one of the life-forbidden zones. The news was quickly reported to Dean. Hierro is a bloodthirsty demonic flower. It has a very high intelligence. It is entrenched in a huge metal vein that stretches for hundreds of miles. The demonic flower lives on top of the vein and feeds on gold and blood. The leader of the corpses has developed intelligence and is conspiring with the demonic flower to lure nearby monsters and adventurers to come close and hunt them down. Noyce slowly reported the situation to Dean. We found the corpses after killing the demonic flower. We found traces of Miss Aisha in the brain of the leader of the corpses. Under his signal, his trusted subordinates brought over a huge metal cage and a huge tray. Locked inside the metal cage was a 5-meter-tall corpse king with long fangs and fingers as sharp as a zombie's. The corpse king did not struggle or resist, as it knew that struggling was useless. However, after coming to this hall, it instinctively felt an extreme sense of danger, causing fear to rise in its heart. When it saw the extremely handsome young man on the throne, it immediately locked onto the source of the danger. It was this young man. It gently sniffed and recognized that the young man wasn't a corpse nor a human. The smell was very strange. It made it feel thirsty, but the abnormal sense of danger made it resist the hunger. On the tray was a huge stamen. It was incomparably red and glistening. Dean's eyes fell on both of them. He used his X-ray vision to analyze the smallest structure of both of them. The stamen was the life core of the demonic flower Yiluo, which was mentioned by Noyce. At the moment it was beating like a heart. It still had vitality. It could be refined into an extremely powerful life armor if it was modified a little. It was a natural hunter's armor material. It should be known that the original clothes of the hunter would be torn after the demonization. Therefore, the imperial capital had specially made special soft materials to make hunter's armor. However, the defense was weak. A lot of thoughts flashed through Dean's mind. He had already thought of the use of the demonic flower Yiluo. Then he threw it to the back of his mind. His eyes burst out a scorching light and fell on the corpse king in the cage. The corpse king couldn't help but tremble in fear. It felt like an ordinary person who had met an undead. It felt like it would be eaten at any time. The next moment, Dean flicked his finger and shot out dozens of meters. He easily cut off the solid metal cage and turned into a bundle of hair. He wrapped the corpse king and pulled it in front of him. The corpse king struggled and wailed as the hair pierced into its brain. A lot of memories emerged in front of its eyes. Dean found a beautiful purple light in those chaotic and bloodthirsty memories. It was a beautiful figure. She was wearing a purple tang suit and her clothes were stained with blood. She stepped into the corpse king's territory. Aisha. Dean recognized her at a glance. She was the one he had been looking for. even if the latter's hair was messy and her face was stained with blood. There was a lot of blood on the corner of her mouth. It seemed that she had eaten something bloody. But Dean could still recognize her at a glance. In the following memory, Dean saw Aisha fighting with the Corpse King and defeating it. Her strength was extremely powerful. When he defeated the Zombie King that was at the level of the Lord of the Deep Caves, he had actually crushed it. After defeating the Corpse King, Aisha didn't eat it. Instead, she became the new king of this territory. She cooperated with the demonic flower, Jello. She drove many undead to lure nearby adventurers and monsters to this forbidden area. This behavior lasted for 2 or 3 months. Then Aisha left the territory of the demonic flower, Jello. She left alone without any undead. Dean's heart tightened. He quickly flipped through the Corpse King's memory. But he didn't see Aisha's figure again. He immediately counted down the Corpse King's memory. He found that Aisha had appeared half a year ago. At that time, he had just entered the Federation and was separated from her in 2 places. The vast land was far apart from each other. Dean couldn't help but grab his chest. Although he didn't have a heart, he still felt a suffocating pain in his chest. He clenched his teeth and once again returned to the memory of the Corpse King and Aisha's first meeting. Then he slowly toured. In this memory, Aisha defeated the Corpse King. Like them, she ate raw meat. She cruelly killed and ate the monsters that wandered into the territory. However, Dean soon saw the difference. Every once in a while, Aisha would soak her body in the water. She wouldn't move until the dust and blood on her body fell off. Then she would get up. This behavior was like a human taking a bath. In addition, when not hunting, she would often sit on the erect corolla of the demonic flower, Jello. She would overlook the entire nearby forest. She would look into the distance, at the sun, and be in a daze. Dean was shocked when he saw these behaviors. Was there a second consciousness in Aisha's mind? From Lin Chongqing's research on the undead, he knew that after the undead reached a certain physique, a second consciousness would be born in the brain. Just like the ordinary Corpse King, it had a simple consciousness. And the longer this consciousness was, the smarter and the higher the IQ. Some of the Corpse Kings that had lived for hundreds of years had an IQ that was not lower than that of sophisticated human beings. At this time, Dean also noticed the clothes on Aisha's body. She used to be her favorite purple dress, but now she was wearing it again. It was obviously not the same set she had worn when they parted. So there was only one result, and that was that she found this kind of clothes and put it on. This also showed that she not only had wisdom but also inherited some of her original preferences. Could it be that she had regained consciousness? Dean's eyelids twitched as he thought of this. He was very excited. But soon, he calmed down. If he still had such fantasies before, then after looking through Lin Chongqing's memory, his understanding of the undead was very detailed. He would not have such fantasies anymore. It was impossible for the undead to recover their consciousness by themselves. In Lin Chongqing's experiment, the undead were born with consciousness. Although there weren't many, but about 30% of them inherited some of their preferences. Some of them were born with consciousness which had nothing to do with the past. For example, the undead used to be a gentle and kind person. But the consciousness that was born was cruel, bloodthirsty, sinister, and despicable. Although Dean didn't want to admit it, but Aisha's behavior was in line with the 30% of the undead. The consciousness that was born just inherited some of the preferences of the original personality. If she had recovered her consciousness, she would have gone to Sylvia to find me or returned to Sylvia. But she didn't. Dean couldn't help but sigh. He was full of loss and regret. At the beginning of the search for Aisha, he had sent top masters in all aspects to search near the giant wall. But there was no trace of her. It showed that she hadn't returned after leaving. In any case, let's find her first. Let her choose whether to remove or keep the second consciousness. Dean thought in his heart. He threw the Corpse King to Noise. Noise was startled. he rushed to subdue the corpse king in order to prevent chaos. From the looks of it, she has the strength of a king. If you can't find her in the Empire, then go outside the Empire. Even if you have to search all the continents and the whole world, you must find her," Dudian said in a cold voice. Noyce, Mason, and others were startled. They didn't expect Dean to be so persistent. They couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. Gathering all the resources of the Empire just to find a woman. It was a waste of money and manpower. If they were to search the whole world, then they didn't know how many soldiers would be sacrificed. It was like the ancient beacons teasing the feudal vassals. However, they had followed Dean for the longest time. They knew the significance of Aisha to Dean. Even if Aisha had turned into an undead, Dean wouldn't leave her. He would eat and sleep with her. They couldn't persuade her with just a few words. Therefore, they kept silent. "You go. I'll ask the Federation and the Fire Dragon country to mobilize all the troops to search for her." Dean got up and looked at Noyce. "I'll go to the Corpse Kingdom in the north. It's not difficult for her to cross the War God's wall with her strength. Maybe we'll find some clues there. I'll be back soon. I'll leave this place to you for the time being. Tell everyone to stay alert and don't slack off." Noyce's heart tightened. He wanted to say something but hesitated. Soon, he sighed and said, "Yes. 3_3610/" Chapter 1243. Dean asked Aurora to call the god of Wa, who was playing in the imperial capital, and asked her to accompany them. Although the Northern Corpse Kingdom was nothing to worry about, it couldn't be underestimated. The strength of the Corpse Kingdom wasn't inferior to the Empire. Due to the undead's unlimited growth and the large number of undead brought by the virus at the beginning of the catastrophe, the territory occupied by the Northern Corpse Kingdom was twice as large as the Empire and the Federation combined. It was almost the area of the entire Asian continent in the old era. For Lin Chongqing and the Demon Emperor, the Corpse Kingdom didn't have a background to rely on and didn't have wisdom. Although it occupied a large area and had a lot of king-level corpses, it was the least harmful. After all, undead couldn't become gods. A moment later, Goddess Wa came back with Aurora, looking very cheerful. Dean's cold face softened into a smile when he saw her. He asked her to come over and explain the reason. The god of Wa didn't care and didn't think about it. Dean took her out of the imperial palace. He felt that the world was not right as he stepped out of the palace. Everything in the world was hazy with a faint crimson hue. The color was very light. It was difficult for ordinary people to distinguish it, but it was very obvious in Dean's eyes. He couldn't help but be startled. Suddenly, he thought of something and immediately raised his head to look. In the clear blue sky, apart from the scorching sun, in another direction, behind the thin clouds in the distance, there was a blood-red full moon. Blood moon! Dean's pupils shrank. He didn't expect that the blood moon that Lin Chongqing was worried about would come. However, the time was different from what Lin Chongqing knew. It was a month ahead. The arrival of the blood moon means that the Ice Magic Worm's spaceship will arrive on Earth. Dean frowned as he thought of the blood moon that Lin Chongqing had experienced. Whenever the Ice Magic Worm came to the Earth to inspect the experimental base, Lin Chongqing would hide in the virtual brain in advance and erase all the data about his existence, including the rumors about him in the Federation. The related people who were familiar with him would naturally clean up the information, such as Jacelity. The Ice Magic Worm that arrived on Earth could make Lin Chongqing, who had mastered demigod's strength, to be so cautious. Although it wasn't a true god, but it was more than enough to crush a demigod. Moreover, the ice demon bug possessed extraordinary technology and had the highest authority of the Federation's artificial intelligence system. It could forcefully restart the machinery hive mind, which was a fatal threat to Lin Chongqing. However, now that the mechanical heart was in Dean's hands, even if it was restarted, it wouldn't affect him. They should be ready to land on Earth. The first place they will go to is the Federation. After collecting data from the Federation, they will know about the changes in the Federation. They will either choose to escape or come to me. Dean's eyes flashed coldly. He immediately changed his mind. He postponed going to the Corpse Kingdom. He would first solve the ice monster worm that had landed in the Federation. To him, although these demonic ice bugs could deal with a demigod, they were still worlds apart from a true god. With the help of Goddess Wa, it would be a piece of cake to kill them. Perhaps he could learn some secrets about the undead from these ice demon bugs. Now that he was standing at the top of the world, he knew many secrets behind the scenes. There weren't many secrets that he didn't know. The Walking Dead virus was one of them, and it was the one he wanted to know the most. Goddess Wa didn't have her own opinion in front of Dean. She agreed immediately when Dean said that he wanted to go to the Federation. Whoosh, whoosh. Dean transformed into a bird and flew out of the Imperial Palace with Goddess Wa. They flew straight towards the south of the Imperial capital. A few hours later, Dean and Goddess Wa crossed the God of War's wall and arrived at the Federation. Now they didn't need to cross the God of War's wall through the sky. No one dared to obstruct them anymore. As soon as they arrived at the Federation, Dean directly landed in the capital. He released his perception and found that there was no shadow of the demonic insect spaceship in the capital. In addition, he also sensed Leslie's aura in the capital. The next moment, Dean appeared next to Leslie. Leslie was having a meeting in an office building to discuss the reform of the Federation's system. At this time, Dean penetrated through the floor-to-ceiling window. He was like a ghost. Many people in the conference room were startled. Great Emperor! Leslie was stunned when he saw Dean. He quickly came forward to greet him. Why didn't you inform me in advance? I would have come to pick you up. No need. Is there any abnormality in the capital today? Dean said directly. Leslie's heart tightened as he saw Dean come in a hurry with a serious expression. It seemed that there was an important matter. He didn't continue to greet Dean. He thought for a moment and shook his head. There isn't any major event from the news reports. Which aspect are you referring to? Dean looked at Leslie. It seemed that nothing major had happened. Moreover, the blood moon had appeared today, so the demonic insect spaceship shouldn't have reached the Earth yet. Nothing. Dean shook his head and left the conference room. Leslie was stunned. He had no way to deal with Dean, who couldn't be seen. The other people in the conference room didn't dare to breathe. All of them had seen Dean before, so they knew the brutality of the Emperor. They didn't expect that he would come to such a small and medium-sized conference. Some of the people who were dozing off were so nervous that cold sweat came out. Their legs under the table couldn't help but tremble. Dean squinted his eyes as he looked at the sky. He was waiting for the arrival of the demonic insect spaceship. Dean thought that he would have to wait for a long time. But after 10 minutes, he saw several tiny black spots appear in the sky. They were getting bigger and bigger. It was the appearance of the demonic insect spaceship. It's coming. Dean looked at Goddess Wa. Get ready to fight. Goddess Wa laughed. Can we eat it? Let's eat it after we finish our business, Dean said. Oh, at this time, the spaceships were getting closer and closer. There were a total of 3 spaceships, and they were completely black. They looked like flying saucers, but there were sharp spikes protruding from their surfaces, making them look slightly sinister. In the blink of an eye, they appeared thousands of meters in the sky. The spaceships suddenly slowed down. It seemed that they had detected Dean and Goddess Wa, who were intercepting them. Not long after, the spaceship stopped a few hundred meters above the two of them. The valves of the spaceship opened, and 4 snow-white polar ice worm kings flew out. Their bodies were chubby, but they had 2 pairs of translucent wings on their back. They flapped their wings as they flew over like flying snakes. Take him away, one of the extreme ice insect kings said in the devil insect language, its voice sounding like it was hissing. The other 3 ice worm kings immediately surrounded Dean and Dudian. Dean raised his eyebrows as he looked at their posture. He didn't resist, as it would save him from attacking the outer shell of the spaceship. Aceheng mobile phone. Chapter 1244. 3 ice worm kings spat out cold air and froze Dean and God of Wa's bodies. They turned into 2 ice sculptures. The ice worms flew up and wrapped them up. They dragged them back to the valve of the spaceship and entered the spaceship. Whoosh! The valve of the spaceship closed and the sound of air flow echoed out. The internal structure of this spaceship was not like the long corridors of human spaceship. Instead, it was a staircase structure, like a beehive, with a large number of entrances and exits. The walls were not made of gleaming metal, but dark red walls that had a very textured texture. There were protruding things that looked like blood vessels, like the internal organs of insects. The lighting was incomparably dim, and one could occasionally hear some slippery movements, like some kind of animal was crawling. Dean and God of Wa were dragged to the center of the spaceship. There was an ovarian throne in the center of the spaceship. It was very spacious. There were tentacles extending from the ground to the throne. There was a long white worm inside the throne. It seemed like it had hair. Its skin was a bit wrinkled. The ice worm king that led Dean and God of Wa into the spaceship hissed in insect language. Great sage, they are 2 earthlings. One of them has the smell of origami. Do you want to dissect them? In this, it used an honorific similar to the insect language, but it was omitted in the translation. Dean's understanding of the insect language came from Lin Chongqing's memory. Lin Chongqing wasn't an insect after all. Although he was able to communicate with insects, but he didn't understand some of the rare languages. Dean's body remained stiff and didn't move, but his pupils slightly contracted as he scanned the entire spaceship. He focused on the old ice insect on the throne of ovaries. According to Lin Chongqing's memory, the ice worm was one of the 12 sages that had come to the Federation twice. Lin Chongqing had given the ice worm its name. Its body is mixed with origami genes. It has a demigod physique. Unfortunately, it doesn't have an absolute and precise balance like God of Wa. Dean's eyes flashed as he saw through the gene structure of the ice worm. Huh! The moon demon bug on the throne looked at the 2 frozen humans. Suddenly, it stood up from its crouching position. It looked like it was looking down on the whole spaceship. 2 red slits appeared on its forehead, like 2 narrow and sharp ruby eyes. After staring at the 2 for a moment, its expression suddenly changed. It rolled its body and shouted angrily, "Kill them, quick!" The surrounding guards were surprised as they didn't understand why the great sage was so nervous. But they unconditionally obeyed the order. They mobilized a large amount of cold air and turned it into icicles and spears. Bang! Bang! 2 ice sculptures suddenly exploded, and ice chips splashed. Dean shook off the ice chips on his cuffs. His eyes flashed, and a high temperature was instantly released from his body. It turned into several fireballs that submerged the ice spears and ice swords that were attacking from all directions. Hiss! The surrounding demonic insects were shocked and looked at the 2 humans in disbelief. They were frozen and imprisoned, but they could actually undo the ice seal on their own? 1 demigod and the rest are king level. More than 30 kings and hundreds of abyss. It's enough to flatten the bases of the Federation and the Empire. Dean indifferently glanced around. His eyes fell on the sage. It seems that you have mastered the demigod experiment. It's a pity that you used it on an insect. The moon monster was shocked. It was sure that it wasn't hallucinating. It spoke in the Federation language. Who are you? The Emperor of the Empire? You even know about the Empire. It seems that everything on Earth is under your control. Dean slightly raised his eyebrows. Unfortunately, I am the one who should ask questions, not you. Then, he turned to Goddess Wa and said, "Catch it. I want its memory, and the rest will be your snack." Clapping her hands excitedly, Goddess Wa said, "Great!" Her figure flashed and disappeared. She appeared in front of the moon monster. Her fingers turned into a large number of silver threads that shrouded the moon monster. The moon demon bug was already prepared when she attacked, but it was still frightened by this terrifying speed. In a hurry, it turned into a sharp white sword and cut off the silver threads. It quickly retreated back into the throne of ovaries. There was a huge corridor inside the throne which was connected to all parts of the spaceship. God of War had seen through it. She didn't do anything, but a large number of sharp blades and white threads came out of the corridor and forced the moon monster out. The white threads had penetrated the ground of the spaceship through her feet. They were waiting in the corridor. The other insects screamed as they saw the great sage was in trouble. The entire spaceship was filled with cold air. Too hard is easy to break. Too soft is easy to fly. Dean couldn't help but sigh as he thought of the old saying. Ice monster and flame monster were extremely powerful. Unfortunately, they were too easy to restrain and their weaknesses were too obvious. It was no wonder that they had to fuse with each other in order to become a god. God of War was surrounded by many insects. Her body was shrouded in cold air, and it was difficult to see her. Dean didn't plan to help. This was a good opportunity for God of War to train. He saw that although God of War was a true god, she lacked training and experience. Her huge potential hadn't been fully displayed yet. The fierce battle ended after a few minutes. The cold air was dispersed by a gust of wind. God of War's body was covered with sharp blades. Each blade was covered with different abilities such as fire, ice, petrification, darkness, poison, and so on. Her image was extremely terrifying. Even the evil gods in myths and legends couldn't compare to her. The bodies of the insects were scattered on the ground. They were slowly crawling and reforming their bodies. She was holding a mass of white mucus in her huge claws. It was the moon monster. Dean breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing that the moon magic worm had been subdued by her, he quickly released his tentacles and plunged them into its body. He assimilated with its cells and read its memory. 10 minutes later, Dean retracted his tentacles. His face was a little gloomy. In this memory, he saw the growth of this moon magic insect. It was originally a source insect born from an ice pool. Because of the excessive cold energy in its body, it formed a cold bead, making it the sage of the ice magic insect clan. All sages were born with it. After becoming a sage, it displayed extraordinary intelligence. It took over the military power from its teacher and led its bloodline of ice demon insects into battle. They fought against the flame demon insects and other sages, seizing territory. The environment of the devil insect planet was harsh. The living environment was very precious. The competition was extremely fierce. It was like a meat grinder, killing a large number of demon insects. Because of this, the number of demon insects was controlled. Otherwise, the planet might not be able to contain all the demon insects. In the hundreds of years of fighting, its life was very monotonous. It was fighting and killing every day. The demon insects didn't have any entertainment like humans. In the hundreds of years, it also experienced the disaster of the demon insect. The origami came and killed the demon insects for food. Every time the origami came, it was like the end of the world for the demon insects. The origami's terrifying digestive ability restrained the demon insects, making them unable to resist. Just like the humans on Earth, they couldn't resist the origami's arrival. Until many sages discussed and opened a new path of survival. They gathered a large number of elites and embarked on an interstellar journey. Then they found Earth. Here, they saw the key to becoming a god and eternal life. That was humans. They analyzed the physique of humans. It was completely different from them. It was very balanced and was the most suitable vessel. For this reason, they began to modify humans to create the perfect vessel. After all, although the original humans were very suitable materials, their physique was weak. It was like a tree with small branches that needed to be polished. When humans resisted, the global nuclear bomb exploded. Nearly half of the great sages were killed. The rest fled in panic. It was also one of the few sages who survived. It led its defeated army to evacuate Earth. But not long after it evacuated, it received a signal from the surviving warriors in the area. It knew the situation on Earth, so it came again. This time, Earth was beyond recognition. There were only a few human survivors. They captured the human survivors, raised them, dissected them, and used them as experimental materials. Other than that, they also tried to study the culture and technology of humans on Earth. They wanted to understand why humans were so weak but could create such terrifying things. So, this base gradually expanded from the initial slaughterhouse to the current Federation. Speaking of this, there was one more thing to add. When it first returned to Earth, it was not just the moon demon insect. There were 5 great sages from the ice demon insect clan. There were also 4 or 5 flame demon insect. It was not very clear about the details. After investigating the situation on Earth, they were relieved and made a plan to experiment on Earth. Chapter 1245. Not long after the plan was made, the origami race, who were also scared away by the nuclear bomb, appeared on Earth. Using the unique technology of the origami race, they divided their territory. At that time, they were thousands of kilometers away from the ice demon bug research base. They built tombs and buried the warriors of the origami race who died in battle. Similarly, the people who survived in that area were also raised by the origami race. The sages of the Flame Magic Bug Clan were not willing to fall behind after they knew about the plan of the Ice Magic Bug Clan. They quickly circled a large area and divided the territory. Then they arrested the survivors in the area and allowed them to breed and bring more fresh experimental bodies. This action caused the population to expand rapidly. The Flame Magic Bug Clan needed endless experimental materials. In order to make it easier to manage, they were allowed to form a country according to the culture of the old era. They became the controller behind the scenes. There was a lack of culture in the past. With the permission of the sages of the Flame Magic Bug Clan, they opened up a part of the culture. This made the Fire Dragon Country become the first land country. The Ice Magic Bug Clan and the Origami Clan saw the benefits and convenience in it, so they adopted the same model. So it formed the situation where the 3 major forces confronted each other. From the general point of view, it wasn't complicated. It went from simple to complicated. But the bloody changes in the middle were unbearable and unimaginable for humans. During that dark period, humans were once reduced to livestock. What was livestock? Clothes didn't cover the body. Everyone was naked. They slept with corpses. They ate raw meat and drank dirty water. They didn't care about beauty or dignity. Dean was curious as to why the Origami and the Flame Magic Bug Clan didn't live on Earth. The answer was found in the memory of the Moon Magic Bug Clan. At the beginning of the nuclear explosion, the Earth was covered with nuclear dust. Volcanoes occurred frequently. The land was barren and the environment was extremely harsh. Although the Flame Magic Bug Clan was tenacious and could adapt to various environments, it wasn't good for their bodies to adapt forcefully. It was like everyone could starve for a few days without eating. But it wasn't good for the body. The Ice Magic Bug Clan liked the cold and icy environment. The Flame Magic Bug Clan liked the hot and warm environment. The temperature difference between day and night was huge. One moment it was snowing, and the next moment it was volcanic eruption. For the demon insects, they could adapt to swamps that were full of methane, and they could also adapt to living underwater. They could even adapt to the lack of oxygen and could survive for a long time in an environment lacking oxygen. However, the change in temperature was the most uncomfortable for them. Their body's ability to adjust temperature was almost zero. At that time, the Earth's environment was like humans in the extreme cold of the North Pole. They should be thankful that they didn't freeze to death. From the experimental base to the formation of the Federation, humanity had been restored to civilization and order under their control for 30 years. During these 30 years, the number of origin bugs that had died due to the strange diseases caused by environmental factors numbered more than 10. There was also a great sage who had also contracted a strange disease. His entire body was covered in extremely itchy hot spots, and he wailed in pain every day. He was unable to think at all, let alone continue with his experiment. Meanwhile, the flame demon bugs on the other side weren't much better off. They quickly understood each other's intentions. After all, they were of the same race, and they had hated each other for countless years. They understood each other extremely well. In order to survive, they had to discuss and finally decided to leave Earth. However, the premise of making this decision was to pull the Wildness God clan into this. Otherwise, leaving the Wildness God clan on Earth would be too dangerous for their forces. Although the Wildness God clan was not afraid of the Demon Bug clan, the secret to becoming a god was in the hands of the Demon Bug clan. The Wildness God clan's research progress was the slowest. In the end, they agreed to this agreement after exchanging a large amount of precious information. Before the three parties left Earth, they left some of their clansmen on Earth to continue supervising the experiment. They changed their way of thinking and secretly led the development of human science and technology. They let humans study humans themselves. The situation on Earth gradually stabilized. The nuclear dust clouds and volcanoes brought by the nuclear bombs gradually calmed down. Humans multiplied in the three major forces. In just 100 years they had developed to a large scale. The nature of humans was exposed in the comfortable environment. They pursued more and more things. Coupled with the technology that they had mastered, they had picked up the lost civilization from the old era. Although humans had gradually restored the appearance of the old era, the highest ruling decisions were still in the hands of the Demon Bug and the Origami. They were still under their surveillance. Therefore, in the imperial capital that was under the control of the Demon Emperor, the development of science and technology was forbidden within the giant wall. Only in the imperial capital that was under the control of the Demon Emperor could there be the shadow of science and technology. Even if there were any horrible and destructive things that were developed, they could be stopped in time. The Empire prohibits the development of science and technology. The three major forces had an agreement that they would not invade each other. That's why there were fewer frictions at the border in the early days. Later on, there were more and more conflict. It's estimated that it was because of the long time. They wanted to test the effectiveness of the agreement. It's ridiculous that they attacked each other and sacrificed humans. Dean looked at the memory of the moon magic insect. He felt that humans were extremely sad in the past 300 years. The most ridiculous and ironic thing was that humans were living a comfortable life in the increasingly perfect order. They were pursuing food, quality of life, entertainment, and so on. They were unaware that they were under surveillance. According to Dean's understanding, even if they were aware of it, it was estimated that most of them wouldn't care about it. After all, the perfect order had already divided them into 3, 6 or 9 ranks. Everyone had to struggle for a living. They couldn't care about the things in front of them. In addition, Dean saw Lin Chongqing in the memory of the moon magic insect. But what surprised him was that Lin Chongqing escaped from the experiment. In addition to Lin Chongqing's own will, it was also the tacit consent of the moon magic insect. The biggest experimental subject of the Federation was Lin Chongqing himself. Lin Chongqing thought that he escaped from the hands of the Demon Bug with his intelligence. He didn't know that all of this was under the surveillance of the moon magic insect. Lin Chongqing was the experimental subject that they had high hopes for. He was the most likely to become a god. And the most important thing was that this experimental subject would complete the experiment on his body. When the experiment was about to be completed, all they needed to do was to pick him up. Every time the Blood Moon and the Demon Bug arrived, Lin Chongqing would erase all traces of himself. Now it seemed that he was playing hide and seek in front of the monitor. It was a bit ridiculous and sad. This time the Demon Emperor is attacking the Federation and conspiring with the Fire Dragon country. Maybe the origami and the flame magic insect are colluding with each other. The ice magic insect clan knew about it. That's why they came to the Earth in advance. The original agreement is only in name now. The moment the Demon Emperor raised his troops to attack the Federation, it has been torn. Dean suddenly felt that the Demon Emperor's attack on the Federation wasn't that simple. The Demon Emperor knew about the existence of Lin Chongsheng. He wanted to attack the Federation and become a god himself. But in the process, no other origami appeared to help him. It made people speculate that the Demon Emperor wanted to hide from the origami and snatch the fruit to become a god himself. 3_3610/ Chapter 1246. Dean had always been curious about the blood moon. He found the reason in the memories of the moon magic insect, but the reason was too shocking. The blood moon was the real red color of the moon, and there were no special effects added. The reason why the moon was red was because the magic insect clan had occupied and transformed the interior of the moon into a telescope to monitor the humans on Earth. The sage lunar insect had relied on the demonic bug that was stationed on the moon to learn about the general situation on Earth from the demonic bug homeworld. It had arrived earlier because the demonic bug that was stationed on the moon had detected the abnormal activation of the machinery heart and informed the homeworld about it, which was why it had hurried over. It was the only sage that came. The rest of the sages had to stay on the ancestral planet. In the past 300 years, the magic insects had invaded Earth, and the sages had been dispatched in large numbers. This led to frequent wars between the sages who stayed on the ancestral planet to fight for power. Now the ancestral planet of the magic insects was in chaos, even worse than Earth. Dean knew the situation on the ancestral planet through the memories of the moon magic insect. What surprised and ironic him was that the remaining 4 or 5 sages on Earth had dissected humans and learned a lot of human culture. These things were naturally used as research materials by them and were brought back to the ancestral planet. The sages who participated in the research of humans, as well as other sages, were unknowingly influenced by human culture. After returning to the ancestral planet, some of the magic insects suggested that the ice insects and the flame insects should stop fighting and work together to resist the origami. Some proposed to annihilate the flame insects and completely dominate the magic insect planet because only one king was needed. Some wanted to annihilate the flame insects and imprison the flame insects like how humans were imprisoned. They thought that this would speed up the process of deciphering the code to become a god. As the demonic insects expressed their opinions and fought with each other, the ancestral star of the demonic insects became more and more chaotic. The ice demon insects split into different factions and fought each other openly and covertly. Many sages had the idea of unifying the ice demon insects first before unifying the flame demon insect. These ideas came from the grand unification of human culture. Hence, the homeworld was embroiled in endless war over the past 300 years. The 4 to 5 wise ones of the demonic insects who had escaped back then fought against each other, and only 3 of them were left, including 2 newly born wise ones from the ice pool. Those 2 wise ones were killed in the cradle before they could experience the might of being wise ones. Therefore, only the weakest force of the ancestral planet, the moon magic insect sage, had come to Earth. It knew that its territory would be plundered when it returned, so it had brought all its elites. Unfortunately, when it arrived on Earth, it encountered the god of Wa, who had become a god, and Dean, who was a quasi-god. Desire can really infect. Dean felt a bit ridiculous as he saw the chaos and strife in the demonic insect's ancestral star. The demonic insects had brought disasters and viruses to the Earth. However, they had been infected by the habits of humans when they dissected humans. The demonic insect's ancestral star had become even more chaotic. Even the ice pool in the breeding ground was about to be broken. In the end, who infected whom? Who would be spared from the virus? The changes in the demonic insect's clan made Dean feel ridiculous. However, most of the existences in the world that could control the life and death of others were ridiculous people. Dean finally knew what the virus was from the memory of the moon magic insect sage. He saw the source of the virus. However, he didn't feel happy after seeing it. Instead, he felt sad and angry because there was no antidote for the birth of this virus. No one had thought of making an antidote for it since it was born. Even the demonic insects only knew how to manufacture and release the virus, but they didn't know how to detoxify it. Moreover, it wasn't the original intention of the demonic insects to produce and release the virus to the Earth. When they first came to the Earth, they could suppress the humans on Earth by force and engulf a large area of human cities. However, the origami intervened and the humans fought back. The demonic insects were forced to develop such a thing. Not only could it destroy the humans, but it could also contain the origami and provide them with a steady stream of food. The virus was very special. If the body of the origami was exposed to the virus for a long period of time, then the infection would affect the body. Their body would swell and they would lose control of their emotions. They would crazily eat. When there was no food, they would even eat their own kind. For humans, the virus would rapidly improve their physique until their genes collapsed. Their brain tissue would be necrotic, and they would turn into an undead. Although they would have extraordinary strength beyond humans, they would be unrecognizable. They would have no consciousness and would not recognize their kin. They would be like beasts. Beasts that were infected by the virus would endlessly demonize. They would become cruel and bloodthirsty. They would continue to evolve until they reached the end of the evolution and completely collapsed. For the demonic insects, the infected humans would turn into undead. They could eat their brain nuclei. The infected beasts would become the incubator for their offspring. In time, the entire Earth would become the second planet of the demonic insect. However, although the ideal was beautiful, the counterattack of humans had disrupted their plans. Moreover, the origami had besieged them. Ice demons and flame demons hated each other. In the end, it led to a three-way situation. After looking through the memories of the moon magic insect, Dean would rather not have met it. The last trace of hope in his heart had been disappointed. There was a kind of incomparable anger in his heart. But soon, he thought of God who was beside him and his current ability. God was omnipotent. It was better to rely on oneself than to rely on others. Since there was no hope in the world, then he would create his own hope. Moreover, recalling the chaotic situation in the memory of the moon magic insect's ancestral star, Dean did not have much respect for the demonic insects. Instead, he felt that it was ridiculous and contemptuous. If the ice demon insect and the flame demon insect were not so extreme and joined hands with each other, perhaps they would have killed their natural enemy, the origami, and unraveled the code to become a god. It was even possible that they would have unified the universe. Such an opportunity had been placed in front of them, but they were blinded by their hatred. Stupid. Ridiculous. The more Dean thought about it, the more stupid he felt. Then he laughed to himself. It was ridiculous that he put his hope on such a stupid thing. It's a group of stupid things like you that forced us to this point. We were almost exterminated. Dean chuckled. There was a hint of self-mockery in his tone. He threw away the moon magic insect in his hand. Whoosh! Godwa, who was next to him, suddenly stuck out her tongue and wrapped it around the moon magic insect like a frog. The body of the moon magic insect squirmed rapidly. Many thorns grew out of its body. It wanted to pierce the tongue of the moon magic insect, but it was useless. Seeing that it was about to be eaten, the moon magic insect laughed in despair. God has been born, but it's not our race. It's a gift for the prey. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. The laughter did not stop and gradually died out. Godwa mercilessly swallowed the moon magic insect. She even burped after eating and muttered, "Why are you learning human language?" Chapter 1247. Dean erased the consciousness of the rest of the Origin worm guards in the spaceship after dealing with the moon magic insect sage. He kept them in the national treasury. The spaceship was disarmed and became his property. I have to go to the moon as soon as possible after I find Aisha. I don't want the news here to be detected by the moon magic insect sages, Dean said in his heart. Although he wasn't afraid of the moon magic insect sage, but he wouldn't underestimate it. The moon magic insect sage was easily dealt with by him. It didn't know that a true god had appeared on Earth. If the other sages knew about this, then they would discuss other countermeasures. After all, they were a race that could cross the interstellar space. It was inevitable that he would have to pay some price and losses if he used other methods. The Earth hadn't been unified yet, and Aisha's matter was always in his heart. He didn't want to deal with the moon magic insects and origami. He would naturally settle the accounts one by one. Let's go to the corpse country. Dean controlled the spaceship and flew towards the corpse country in the north. It was easy for him to control the spaceship after getting the memory of the moon magic insect sage. Although the spaceship needed permission, but he could completely copy the body of the moon magic insect sage. He could even input the memory of the moon magic insect sage and make it reborn. The spaceship flew at supersonic speed. There were large clouds outside and endless mountains and forests under their feet. In less than half an hour they flew to the bitter north. The climate here was obviously lower than that of the Federation and the Empire. Extinct volcanoes could be seen everywhere. There were few forests as all of them were submerged by swamp. There were stone walls that were hundreds of meters high erected at the border. However, the construction technique was obviously humans. It wasn't like the giant wall forged by the origami. It was directly printed with soil mixed with metal without any trace of gap. The flying ship whizzed past the high wall and scattered the group of dead birds that were hovering in the air. A large flock of crow-like birds chirped and tried to catch up with the flying ship, but in the blink of an eye, they were already miles away from the flying ship. After entering the border of the corpse country, Dean saw a large number of wandering undeads under his feet. They seemed to have heard the whistling sound. Many undeads looked up with dull eyes. These corpses evolved in a variety of strange ways. Some arms were like sickles, some crawled on the ground, and some had a lower body like a spider. Only the low-level corpses still retained the complete human appearance. At most, their fangs and fingernails were relatively sharp. The strength of the corpse kingdom can't be underestimated. Dean saw the countless undeads along the way. The original contempt had long disappeared, and he felt a bit scared. The undeads here were like ants, and most of them had evolved to be more fierce. They were not ordinary low-level undeads. If the Emperor of the Corpse Kingdom called them to attack the Empire or the Federation, perhaps no one would be able to stop him. The zombies weren't afraid of death and fought crazily. Their bodies were covered in viruses. Regardless of whether it was the Federation's mecha or the Empire's hunters, they couldn't avoid them in time. In a head-on battle, it was simply impossible to defend against the assault of the army of zombies. However, from the memories of Lin Chongqing and Tyrant King, Dean found that although the Corpse Kingdom dominated the north, but they didn't like to fight with the Empire and the Federation. It seemed that they were independent of the Earth and never took the initiative to invade the Empire or the Federation. They were often annihilated by the Empire's legions before launching a counterattack. Because of this, whether it was the Empire or the Federation, they didn't care too much about the Corpse Kingdom. But not caring didn't mean that the Demon Emperor and Lin Chongqing ignored it. They had been trying to find ways to inquire about the situation of the Corpse Kingdom, but it was extremely difficult to mix humans into the Corpse Kingdom. They could only send masters with special abilities, but these masters could only deceive the eyes of the low-level undeads. If they encountered the high-level Corpse King, it would be easy to expose them. Even the army of undeads trained by Lin Chongqing with conditional reflex couldn't mix into the Corpse Kingdom. After all, conditional reflex instructions were difficult to complicate, and mixing into the Corpse Kingdom would encounter many situations. It was difficult to take care of everything. Eventually, it led to the corpses of such scouts sinking into the sea, never to return. When the spaceship went deep into the hinterland of the Corpse Kingdom, Dean found that the undeads he saw along the way suddenly ran in the same direction, and that direction was the same as where the spaceship was going. It was like these undeads knew where he would arrive, and deliberately rushed over. The Corpse Kingdom has also mastered technology. Dean's eyes flashed. It was obvious that the scouts at the border of the Corpse Kingdom saw the spaceship and passed the information to the center of the Corpse Kingdom, and from the center of the Corpse Kingdom to the outer ring of corpses. Such a fast and tight communication method was not inferior to the Empire and the Federation. He was more and more surprised. He glanced at Goddess Hua, who was beside him. With her in charge, there shouldn't be any trouble. After a moment, a king's city appeared at the end of the spaceship. The construction was not much different from the human city, but the momentum was more magnificent and majestic. There were strange buildings in the city, some were like human limbs, some were like the internal organs of animals. Looking from the sky, it was like the pieces of countless giants were pieced together. It was a living demon city. At this moment, a large number of undeads gathered in the city, looking up at the spaceship. Some of the undeads roared and bared their fangs, as if they wanted to scratch the spaceship down. Dean's eyes swept around and saw a giant platform in the center of the Corpse Kingdom. There were several scorching life energies on it. Most of them were the Emperor and the powerhouses of the Corpse Kingdom. Whoosh! The spaceship whistled and slowly slowed down, and stopped in front of the giant palm that was hundreds of meters high. There was a very vast square above the giant palm. There were many undeads standing on it, clustered around a dozen figures in the middle. In the middle of these people stood a young man with black hair and black eyes, dressed in white. Compared to the demon-like undeads around him, he was completely a handsome human man. There was no change in his body, but the smell of undeads exuded from his body was stronger than any of the undeads around him, even to the point of pungent. Click! The spaceship opened, and Dean and Goddess Hua slowly flew out of it, looking down at the many undeads on the giant palm. "Are you the Emperor of the Corpse Kingdom?" Dean looked down at the young man in white. The latter was about 1.78 meters tall, and compared to the dozens of ferocious or huge undeads around him, he looked like a small dot. "Are you the god who recovered the Federation and suppressed the Empire?" The white-clothed young man wore a smile on his face as he looked at him calmly. "Could it be that you've come here today to use the same method to suppress our corpse nation?" Dean was a little surprised when he heard this. "You know me? My news shouldn't have spread to your Corpse Kingdom, right?" "We naturally have a way to know." The young man in white smiled faintly. "It's very difficult for you to subdue the undeads, but it's very easy for us undeads to subdue you humans. After all, who made you smarter?" Chapter 1248. Dean understood and said indifferently, "Being smart has its advantages, but being stupid also has its disadvantages. I don't know if you are willing to be smart or stupid." The youth in white gently smiled and said, "I can make smart people listen to my words. Naturally, I am a smarter person." "That's great." Dean glanced at him and said, "With the power of your Corpse Kingdom, it shouldn't be particularly difficult to attack the Empire and the Federation. Since you are smart, why didn't you do such a smart thing before?" "War isn't a smart thing. Only stupid people are forced into a corner and can't think of a better way. Only then will they start a war." The youth in white smiled and said, "It's like two boorish men. They can't reason with each other and can't negotiate. In the end, they can only fight." Dean indifferently said, It's a pity that there are too many stupid people in this world. Only fists can wake them up. Fortunately, I'm not such a stupid person, the youth in white said. Dean took a deep look at him. He thought that he would start a massacre here, and blood would flow like a river. He didn't expect that the Emperor of the Corpse Kingdom would have the intention to surrender. Although in his opinion this was indeed a smart approach, but how many people in this world would choose the smart path? Can you tell me the reason? Dean asked. The youth in white looked at him and said, You can suppress the Empire and the Federation. Presumably you are already the god that they pursue. But you are a human. I believe that even if you have been cultivated by any of them, you should have returned to your freedom and are no longer restricted by them. Otherwise, you wouldn't have overthrown them, right? Dean quietly listened and said, Yes. In some ways, our positions are the same. After all, we used to be humans. The youth in white put away the indifferent smile on his face and said with a bit of coldness in his eyes, The Empire and the Federation belong to the Aragami and the Ice Monster respectively. The Fire Dragon country is controlled by the Flame Monster. The 3 extraterrestrial forces occupy the Earth and use humans as experimental subjects to check and balance each other. They are a balance. No matter which side I attack, I will break this balance. Once it is broken, there will be a worse situation. This is one of the reasons why I'm not willing to attack. The second reason is because of the ordinary humans. Once the war breaks out, there will be countless casualties. At the same time, more people will be infected by the virus and become like us. This is not something I want to see. Dean's eyes widened as he heard this. He was stunned. The Corpse Emperor said that war was a stupid thing to do. But now he said that he didn't want to fight in order to avoid the sacrifices of the humans of the Federation and the Empire? And to avoid being infected and becoming a zombie. The youth smiled as he saw Dean's astonished face. Although I know it's strange to say so, but I'm serious. It stands to reason that the more people infected, the stronger my forces will be. It's not impossible to unify the world, but... He paused for a moment and smiled bitterly. You won't believe me even if I tell you, but I actually want to be a human. Dean was speechless. A corpse emperor who controlled countless walking corpses and corpse kings actually said that he wanted to be a human? Is this black humor? Dean snapped. The white-clothed young man shook his head slightly and said, Over 200 years ago, I was infected by a virus and became a walking corpse. After a period of muddle-headedness, I evolved into a corpse king and gave birth to my current consciousness. After my consciousness was born, I hunted a large number of humans and infected the experts among them, turning them into walking corpses. I absorbed them into my subordinates and fought with me everywhere. At that time, the Corpse Kingdom hadn't been established yet. The Empire was still building the giant wall. I killed countless people and monsters. My evolution speed was very fast. I gathered a large number of corpse kings to work for me. In order to become stronger, to kill more people, to eat more delicious meat, I learned human culture, learned human technology, and learned human life. A hint of gentleness appeared in his eyes as he said softly, After learning more and more things, I realized that these delicious foods are not just for eating. Humans are very interesting, and by understanding the knowledge of humans, I also know what I am and the reason for my birth. I really want to know what the memories of when I was originally a human are. What kind of person was I before I was infected and became an undead? Unfortunately, whether it was the technology of humans, insects or origami, none of them could help me solve this mystery unless I become a god. However, from the research data of origami and insects, I know that undead can't become a god. It's impossible in this life. So I also know that if a god is born from insects and origami, my good days will be over. He sighed, but he was not sad. Instead, he was relieved. He looked up at Dean and said, Now that God has been born, and it is not on the side of the origami and the demonic insects. It is a pleasant surprise for me." Dean listened to him. If he didn't see that the expression of the corpse emperor was natural, he wouldn't believe his ears. He thought that the corpse emperor was the same as the demon emperor. He didn't expect that the corpse emperor would say such words. A dignified corpse emperor wanted to become a human and was ready to wait for the birth of a god. "Since you know that a god will be born, haven't you thought about destroying the Empire and the Federation? Destroy them at all costs and stop their research? If so, won't the whole Earth fall into your hands?" Dean couldn't help but ask. The white-clothed youth sighed. In an instant, his body seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life. He said in a slightly lonely tone, "I've ruled the corpse empire for so many years. Everything in my sight is my territory. No one dares to disobey my orders. But what's the meaning of this? When all you see are your subordinates, they will respect you, and be afraid of you, but none of them will understand you, know your dreams and ambitions, and know your expectations and fantasies. They will not dare to talk to you freely, and they will not be able to have a good conversation with you. Only one person can sit on the throne. It's destined that the scenery he sees is higher than everyone else. It's also destined that no one will understand you. The territory of my corpse empire is bigger than the Empire and the Federation. Even if I rule the whole world, how far can I see? It's just the end of the horizon. This Earth is round after all." Chapter 1249. Is it because of loneliness? Dean stared at the corpse emperor. From Lin Chongqing's memory, Dean had almost experienced the feeling of being a king. Moreover, it had been more than 200 years. However, it was unknown whether Lin Chongqing's memory was affected by the artificial intelligence, but he lacked emotions, so the loneliness he experienced was not deep. Instead, the feeling of having everything under control left a deep impression on him. It's true that being a king is lonely, but isn't an ordinary citizen also lonely? Dean stared at it and slowly said, "It's the same loneliness. Everyone wants to explore the loneliness of the king, but who cares about the loneliness of an ordinary person? Who wants to understand? If you don't stand at the top and are the center of attention, even if you are as arrogant and lonely as an emperor, no one will want to know your thoughts and care about your feelings. Perhaps this is what true loneliness is?" The white-robed young man was startled. He smiled bitterly and said, "This loneliness is not that loneliness. As a human, although there are troubles in life, there are also joys in life. Happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy are all from the heart. However, as a king, there is only one emotion, and that is indifference. This kind of indifference is not pretending to be arrogant, it is just that I have seen too much, seen too clearly, and understood everything, so everything is boring. I would rather be lonely than boring." Dean indifferently said, "That's because you haven't been a human. You haven't experienced despair that is out of control. It's worse than death. You will know that loneliness is nothing compared to being in control of everything. Moreover, loneliness is like wine. It can be slowly tasted. It is much more interesting to enjoy it with everyone. What is the difference between a group of people and a group of fools?" The youth in white shook his head. "Everyone's pursuit is different. It seems that we are doomed not to be together. Why should the king and the minister talk about being together? This is the loneliness you are talking about." Dean indifferently said, "Is your corpse kingdom willing to submit to me and listen to my orders?" The white-clothed youth looked at him deeply and said, "I'm willing." His answer was very straightforward, as if there was no hesitation. "What is your name?" Dean asked. The young man in white smiled and said, "We've been talking for so long, and you only remembered to ask for my name? Aren't you forgetful?" "I'm not forgetful. I didn't need to know before, but now it is necessary," Dean said very straightforwardly. The white-clothed young man was stunned for a moment before he laughed involuntarily. "In that case, I'm considered to have escaped by luck. That's true. With the abilities of you and the true God beside you, if we were to really fight with you, we would only be asking for trouble. Although our corpse nation's research on gods isn't as deep as the Empire and the Federation's, we also know that true gods are immortal and have no flaws. Previously, when the Demon Emperor detonated the nuclear weapon and killed millions of civilians in the Imperial City, his goal wasn't to kill the true God beside you, but you. However, he still underestimated the abilities of a true God. Dean narrowed his eyes. You know the details. The white-clothed youth smiled and said, "Back to the topic, my name is Bolin. As for what I was called before, I don't know. I'll take the liberty to ask, do you have a way to cure the undead virus and let all the undead return to human form?" Dean's eyes lit up. Do you want to restore the undead, or do you just want to see if I have the means to do so? Of course I want to restore everyone. Mainly I want to restore myself to human form. Berlin laughed. Dean narrowed his eyes. Do you want to be an adult? I want to know what kind of person I was before. I want to be a human and have children. Berlin stared at Dean. Dean was silent for a moment. I need to read your memory. Bolin was slightly startled, but he wasn't too surprised. He nodded and said, "All right." Dean took a deep look at him. Going through the memory to touch the brain was tantamount to holding its life in his hand. It was willing to do such a thing. It could be seen that it was really loyal to him. However, it was difficult for him to understand. The greatest wish of the Corpse Emperor was to become a human? What was the long-cherished wish of a human being? He raised his hand and pressed on Berlin's forehead. Berlin didn't resist and let his fingers touch his forehead. The next moment Dean searched Berlin's memory. A large number of memories quickly flipped through his mind. From the time when Berlin's consciousness was born, he was bloodthirsty and killed. Later his intelligence grew, and he no longer blindly slaughtered. Instead he used all kinds of tricks to hunt humans and monsters. In his eyes there was no difference between humans and monsters. If there was a difference then it would be that one was weak while the other was strong. He hunted wantonly and evolved rapidly. He used tough means to control other corpse kings to work for him. Gradually he formed a territory and gathered more and more undead into his territory to become his soldiers. He led the corpse kings to sweep around. He met other corpse kings and subdued them. His power was like a snowball rolling and eventually formed a small country. After fighting for decades, its murderous nature had gradually weakened, as if it had killed too much and was tired of killing. Facts had proven that doing too much of anything in this world would make one feel bored. In these years, he came into contact with the Empire and the Federation. He had a deeper understanding of human beings. He also inadvertently infected with human habits. Finally, he led many corpse kings to settle in the north. He occupied a large territory and stood as an equal with the Empire and the Federation. In its later memories, it rarely fought. Instead, it built palaces and residences like humans, tasted tea and arranged flowers, drank wine and had fun. It played with all the things that humans liked. Its yearning for humans grew, and it hoped to become a real human. It always wondered how it would taste when it tasted good wine with the taste buds of a human's tongue. When a person was quiet, he often recalled the things of his predecessor. But he always had no clue. From the memory of the first 200 years, the Berlin Corpse Emperor didn't lie. At the end of the memory of China, Dean saw an unforgettable figure. It was Aisha. In the memory of Berlin, Aisha suddenly appeared at the border of the Corpse Kingdom. He got a report from the Corpse King that there was an extremely powerful Corpse King in his territory. He personally went to meet Aisha. He was amazed by Aisha's appearance. His heart unexpectedly fell in love with her. However, Aisha's performance was very indifferent. She kept people thousands of miles away. When the Corpse Emperor met her for the first time, the two of them had a disagreement. Aisha's strength wasn't inferior to the corpse emperor's. The corpse emperor stopped and asked for peace. He took Aisha to the corpse king's city and treated her as a distinguished guest. But Aisha didn't stay in the corpse kingdom for long. She left. Before leaving, the corpse emperor asked where she was going. She only said that she was going to find the way to become a god. It's almost over. This book has almost expressed everything that should be expressed. It will explode before the end in a few days. Acehang mobile phone reading address. Chapter 1250. Does she want to become a god? Dean was startled. He loosened the corpse emperor's hand and didn't speak. Berlin slightly twisted his neck as he heard Dudien's words. He asked, "You have announced to the world that you are looking for traces of her. Do you know her? Do you know what kind of person she used to be?" Dean slowly recovered. "She is a unique person. A kind and strong person." Berlin sighed. "She is indeed a good person. Unfortunately, it's easy for a good person like you to get into an accident and end up miserable. I guess I used to be a good person too." Dean glanced at him. "Not all of them are good people, but most of them. You are not necessarily a good person, maybe a villain." "It's hard to say," Berlin retorted. "Look at the battlefield. The bravest and most deserving of the title of hero are not the surviving veterans, but the soldiers who have already died in battle. Those who survive from the battlefield are more likely to be deserters or coward. They charge at the back, so they survive. And the brave and fierce usually charge at the very front. When two armies cross swords, the faster one runs and the fiercer one charges, the faster one dies. That's why the strong die and the weak live. It's not like the weak die first and the strong survive. How can a single person's ability influence a huge battlefield? Similarly, good people are easy to get into an accident. Why? Because good people are always warm-hearted, they will help, and then they will lose their lives. On the other hand, those who watch without lifting a finger are safe and sound. Good people can survive if they don't go to help. But what kind of good person is that? Therefore, this is a strange theory. Using your human mathematical formula to calculate, good people are equal to death, and evil people are equal to life. In other words, those who survive are evil people. If there is a good person who survives, then nothing big must have happened to this good person. Therefore, there is no need for him to do anything, and he will be safe and sound. Dudien indifferently said, "Human society is more complicated than you think. It's not just good people and bad people. It's not as simple as two formulas to distinguish them. It's better if you don't delve into it. Otherwise, with your strength and status, you will inevitably do something that will harm yourself." Berlin smiled but didn't refute nor agree. "Since your corpse kingdom has surrendered, you should keep an eye on the border. After I'm done, I'll hold the coronation ceremony and unify all the mainland forces. You have to respond to the banner. In the future, you may join me to fight against the monsters in the sea. We'll flatten and destroy the forbidden areas on Earth one by one so that my people can travel to every corner of the world." Berlin nodded. "I didn't misjudge you. You will stand in the position of the human race. That's because the human race is under my control. It's my force," Dean indifferently said. He turned around and returned to the spaceship with God of Wa. Looking at the flying ship whizzing away and disappearing into the horizon in the blink of an eye, Bo Lin slowly withdrew his gaze and sighed. Although he's an evil person, what he does is good. He was just about to turn around and return to the palace when a ferocious-looking corpse king with 3 heads and 6 arms grabbed him and bit down on his neck. Bolin didn't expect the corpse king to attack him. It had to be known that the corpse kings were all under his control, so it was impossible for them to attack him. He was caught off guard, and the corpse king was extremely close and incredibly fast. He didn't even have time to react and was bitten. In the next moment, he suddenly erupted with power. His arms shook and he pushed the corpse king away. Buzz! He felt his brain was buzzing as he pushed away the corpse king. His eyes were bloodshot and evil thoughts were growing in his mind. After a moment he was panting and slowly calmed down. The expression on his face slightly changed. His temperament was a bit cold and evil. There was a big difference from the gentle and elegant feeling he had before. I didn't bet wrong. It's funny that the gods are controlled by humans. I knew that I wouldn't fight as long as I was willing to surrender. After a long time in the future, when the planet is unified, he will inevitably go to the stars and kill the nests of the demonic insects and origami. Berlin's eyes were cold. There was a sneer on his lip. After killing the demonic insects and origami, he will continue to explore the universe. There is no limit in this vast universe. No one knows if there are only the demonic insects and origami. Maybe there are other life forms and higher civilizations. The lifespan of the gods is long. When they finish exploring their own territory, they will continue to explore new territories and continue to fight. They will never stop until they meet a strong enemy that they can't resist. No matter what, when he conquers the stars and the universe in the future, he will not put the earth in his eyes. At that time, it will fall into my hand. Although I will be under him, but who can be the real number one in this world? Who knows if there is a stronger existence above the number one? Such a greedy pursuit, let him find it. I am already satisfied to get the ruling rights of this planet. But I have to wait slowly. Fortunately, the ending is good. There is no harm in waiting. Anyway, I have waited for more than 200 years. The spaceship whizzed over the corpse kingdom, but the speed was not as fast as when it came. The reason was that Dean did not know where to go for a while. Where should he find Aisha in this big world? If it was in the old era, human beings were spread all over the world. An international warrant was enough to find her to the ends of the earth. But now it was different. He could only rely on himself to find her one by one. I have to use the technology of the Federation to the Empire and the Fire Dragon country to restore order to this land. Dean's eyes flashed. He felt a little annoyed when he thought of this. Using the technology of the Federation to restore this place to the era of advanced communication in the old era would take time. It would take at least a few months. The real effect might take a year or two. At this moment, he felt that every day he waited was torture. The world had been conquered, but to find a person was more difficult than conquering the whole world. She is not in the Empire. She has left the Corpse Kingdom and is not in the Federation. The Fire Dragon country is also looking for her. There is no news so far. There are not many places she can go now. Could she be in some deep mountain forest? Dean thought about it with the exclusion method and frowned. He drove the spaceship, not to return to the Empire, but along the deserts, mountains, and other remote places. After half a day, the sun went down, but Dean still didn't find any trace. He couldn't help but sigh. Finding a needle in a haystack wasn't a good idea. Moreover, Aisha could move. If it was a piece of wood that grew in one place and wouldn't move, then sooner or later he would find it. But if Aisha was wandering around and happened to pass by him, then wouldn't it be like going around in circles? Where are you? Dean looked at the dark forest and sighed. Chapter 1251. Dean piloted the spaceship back to the Imperial City. Dudian asked Goddess of Wa to go to the moon to find the base of the demonic insects. Moreover, he transmitted the information about the moon to her in the form of memory fragments so that she could conquer the moon. Mom, I'll be back soon. Goddess Wa happily ran out like a child going to the playground. Dean watched her leave. There was a hint of softness in his eyes. Goddess Wa had called him mother, so how could he not regard her as his own child? Moreover, they came from the same body, so there was always a sense of intimacy between them. It's hard for my body to resist the vacuum of the universe. She hasn't learned how to defend herself, but she should be able to master it on the way out of the atmosphere. Dean thought. The The vacuum of the universe was a biological forbidden zone. The reason wasn't just the lack of oxygen but also the radiation of cosmic rays and the temperature difference. The side close to the sun was scorching hot while the other side was cold and close to absolute zero. Even the demonic insects didn't dare to rely on their body to drift in the space. The sudden change in temperature was enough to destroy the biological balance in their body. But all of this wasn't a problem for a true god. The true god in the theory of demonic insects and origami could go deep into the core of the sun and move in the absolute zero. After all, the real absolute zero didn't exist. Moreover, even if they entered the absolute zero environment, they could use the method that Dean taught Goddess Wa to create a thermal reactor in their body to destroy the absolute zero environment. They could use the outer shell of their body as armor to resist the absolute zero environment and form another layer of environment inside their body to survive. All of this was just a matter of thought for a true god. But for Dean, he had to rely on the energy of the mechanical heart, and it was extremely difficult. Not letting her take the spaceship is also to train her to stimulate her potential. Dean's eyes flashed. Although Goddess Wa was a true god, but she was far from the complete form of the true god in the theory of origami and demonic insects. According to the theory of origami and demonic insects, gods were omnipotent. They could even swallow the sun, assimilate the planet and integrate their body into any celestial body in the universe, including the black hole that could crush light. Immortal, omnipotent. They were born with the universe, but they didn't necessarily perish together. However, God Wa was still far from becoming a true god. She was just like a young god who was learning how to walk. But even if it was just a young god, it had the power to suppress all life on Earth. Where are you? Dean looked at the night sky as his thoughts drifted away. The next day, Goddess Wa returned to the imperial capital. She passed the memory of the moon base to Dean. It was as if Dean had personally experienced it. All the insects in the moon base were subdued by her. She swallowed all the rebels. The rest of the insects were instilled with slave memories. They were loyal to her and recognized her as their master. The insects continued to manage the moon base for her. According to Dean's instructions, Goddess Wa had them block the news from the Earth and ask about the situation on the demonic insect planet. Dean called Noyce, Mason, Barton and others. The Corpse Emperor of the Corpse Country has surrendered to me. The Fire Dragon Country has handed over the military power to us. The Chelan King is willing to listen to the dispatch of the imperial capital. As for the Federation, we have already stepped on the imperial capital. Look at the whole world, and all the continents are under our control. Your Majesty is wise. Noyce bowed respectfully. There was a bit of joy in his eyes. Mason, Barton, Aurora and other people who were closest to Dean were happy. They knew about the surrender of the Corpse Country last night. The changes in this period of time made them feel unbelievable. It was like a dream. Not long ago, they were trembling in fear in a small giant wall. But now with Dean's help, they had become the kings of the abyss. Even the Lord of the Abyss was like an ant in front of them. They could kill them at will. In addition to the improvement of their own strength, the most exciting and shocking thing was the forces under Dean's control. The whole continent and the whole world belonged to them. In the past, they wouldn't even have dared to think of such a thing. In fact, they would never have even thought of such a thing. But now, it had come true. Dean smiled. When do you think we should unify the forces? Noyce was quick-witted. He immediately said, now that the world is under the feet of the Great Emperor, I suggest that we choose a good day to invite the Great Emperor to ascend the throne and become the ruler of the world. Then, we can integrate all the forces together and establish an everlasting empire. The sun doesn't set? Dean said. There was such an empire in history, but it was destroyed. Let's call it the Sun Empire. Edward, Dean's student, said in excitement. The sun is eternal. Teacher's dynasty is eternal. Dean smiled and shook his head. The sun has a lifespan. But it is too long for humans. So it is eternal to be comparable to the sun. Everyone was startled. Noyce was the first to react. He didn't expect Dean's ambition to be so big. He didn't think that Dean's ambition would be so big. Noyce felt uneasy, but he didn't show it. He recommended, "How about we call it the Ian dynasty? Born with God, coexisting with the universe." Dean looked at him and smiled. "Ian means time. It has a good meaning. Let's call it that." Everyone heaved a sigh of relief and congratulated him. "You can choose the day of the coronation." Dean closed his eyes. "It will be held within 3 months," Noyce respectfully said. "The subordinates will find the best astrologer and choose the best day." Everyone rejoiced as they left the hall. Dean would be the ruler of the world and establish a dynasty. They were the most trusted people of Dean. Naturally, they would have a high position. Half a month later, Dean personally chose the capital of the dynasty. He didn't look for someone to calculate the geography. He didn't believe in this, so he directly appointed Sylvia as the capital. He rebuilt the giant wall of Sylvia and made it more magnificent than the current imperial capital. After selecting the address of the imperial capital, Dean also received a large number of information about the giant wall of Sylvia. There were also some flattering words sent by the nobles and marquises. Most of them were praising Sylvia's excellent geographical location, close to the sun, God's blessing, and so on. Dean casually flipped through some, but when he saw one of the volumes of information, he suddenly froze. Chapter 1252. This was the record of the origami in the giant wall of Sylvia. The giant wall was the graveyard of the origami. The origami that was buried in Sylvia was called Sylvia. That was how the giant wall got its name. However, this record contained all the detailed information of the origami, including her identity when she was alive. Human. Sister. Dean stared at the information of Sylvia in his hand. The photo that was posted on it described the identity of the origami. It was his sister who had been separated from him for 300 years. The sister who had taken a last look at the freezer before it was closed. The sister who had taken care of him since he was a child. She turned out to be Sylvia. After conquering the empire, Dean had collected some information about the origami from various places in the imperial capital. Although the core secrets of the origami had been destroyed by the demon emperor, there were many ancient families in the imperial capital. Some of the ancient secret history of the origami hadn't been erased. Instead, they had been secretly recorded and had fallen into his eyes. As early as 300 years ago, the origami and the demonic insects invaded the earth. The demonic insects invaded the earth from the front. However, the origami were much more cunning. They invaded the earth from the other side and sneaked into the human society like parasites. They parasitized the human body. The best of them had mixed into the upper class of the human society and urged the humans to fight against the demonic insect. The origami named Sylvia had taken over the human body of his sister, Duan. Once the origami had taken over the body of another creature, it would either swallow the original consciousness of the creature or be swallowed by the original creature's consciousness. The body would become nutrients for the original creature's evolution. However, there was a third unexpected situation. The consciousness of the original creature and the origami would interfere with each other and mix with each other. In the end, it would be neither the origami nor the human. Such an unexpected situation had led to the collapse of the conspiracy of the origami. Many origami had been exposed and pushed from behind the scenes to participate in the war. That was why a large number of origami had died in the battle. No wonder my freezer would appear in the giant wall of Sylvia. It would appear in the giant wall and not in the wilderness outside the giant wall. Dean was in a daze. At first he thought that it was just a fluke, but now it seemed that his sister had taken shelter in his freezer. but for some unknown reason, it caused his freezer to wander out and pile up in the garbage. So, when the giant wall was built, Sister was still alive. At the same time, it also meant that although Sister was possessed by the origami, she did not completely lose her consciousness. Instead, she might have become a second or third type of existence. Sister, she helped me again. Dean couldn't help but twitch. He punched the table, and the whole table turned into dust. He closed his eyes in pain. His sister was in front of him, but he didn't find her in advance. Most importantly, he got Sylvia's body when he became the Wall Lord. But he had dissected it. Not only did he not repay his loved one, but he even ruined her body. Bastard! He crushed the documents in his hand and punched himself in the chest, breaking his ribs. His body healed automatically, but he angrily brandished the sharp blade, tearing the wound on his chest even bigger. The stimulation of pain affected every nerve in his body, and the pain was unbearable. When the pain was unbearable, his thoughts were not as clear, and the vexation and pain in his heart were not as intense. The pain of the flesh could indeed replace the pain of the soul. Damn it, damn it, damn it! He punched himself again and again. Even his own arms were cut off by the demonized blades on his shoulders. He hated his own arms and regretted his actions back then. Now, he could have as many origami corpses as he wanted, but none of them could make up for what he had done back then. No matter how strong he was, he couldn't reverse time. That night, the maids and guards inside and outside the Imperial Divine Palace all heard the violent vibrations coming from the walls inside, as well as angry roars, which made them tremble with fear. Noyce and Aurora, who lived in the temple, were alarmed. They wanted to check and inquire, but Dean roared at them. They could only stand outside and wait. Their faces were full of worry. "What happened to Teacher?" Aurora asked in a low voice. Noyce looked at the golden light in the room inside. "Now I don't know what he is thinking." Aurora looked at him. "Teacher seems to be in a bad mood recently. He is more likely to lose control than before." Noyce whispered. There was unspeakable bitterness in his voice. "What does it mean to lose control?" "It means that he doesn't restrain himself and let his temper do as he pleases." The reason why he didn't restrain himself was because he knew that the world belonged to Dean. There was no need to be afraid of anyone or anything. So why should he restrain his behavior? But what would a person become if he didn't restrain himself? Aurora wasn't just a little girl who wanted to avenge her sister. She had trained in the giant wall of Sylvia and experienced the world in the giant wall of Balga. She had witnessed the ups and downs of the imperial capital and the rise and fall of countless families. She had experienced the vicissitudes of the new kings. She heard Noyce's words and looked at her teacher's most trusted and familiar person. She suddenly felt worried. "Perhaps he hasn't found Miss Aisha," Aurora whispered. Noyce silently nodded. He hoped that she would find him soon. Perhaps only she could calm him down and restore his former calm and wise appearance. The night passed. The haze over the imperial capital seemed to be dispelled by the morning light. In the study room, Dean sat on the ground decadently. His eyes were dull, and he looked blankly at the air. After a night of venting, his mind was sober, but the regret and pain still remained in his heart. A long time passed. Suddenly, he thought of a question. If his sister was possessed by the origami, then what about his father and mother? He sobered up and stood up from the ground. He quickly found Noyce and asked him to send all the information about origami to him. Soon, a thick stack of information was piled up in another study room. He quickly read through the information 5 times in less than 10 minutes. He didn't see any trace of his parents. He didn't know why, but he felt relieved and a bit lost at the same time. God is omnipotent. It would be great if he could resurrect them out of thin air. Dean thought in his heart, but his reason told him that it was impossible. Even if he could create his parents and sister, it would be based on his own memories about them. All their thoughts were instilled in their minds by himself. It was equivalent to creating his parents from 300 years ago. They weren't real parents who had experienced the changes of the world for 300 years. Perhaps this could also be considered real? After all, his parents from 300 years ago were also his parents. His subsequent words and emotional changes were all based on his parents' personalities. His heart was boiling as he thought of this. He immediately began to try. Father, mother, sister, I want to bring all of you back to life. Dean's eyes lit up. The cells in his body surged as a lump of flesh was demonized from his arm. Gradually, the muscles and bones were demonized and transformed into a human shape. The first demonized image was his mother who created him. She was a smart female doctor. Soon, his mother appeared in front of him. Cotton clothes were constructed on her body. It was made by the transformation method. The second one was his father. A middle-aged man with thin cheeks and a slightly serious expression stood in front of him. The third one was his sister. She was a little girl in her teens. She had red lips and white teeth. She was a beauty from an early age. The three of them were like three meat carvings. They stood motionless. Dean went forward and instilled memories into them one by one. Chapter 1253. After a moment, Dean inputted all the memories into their mind. His heart was inexplicably nervous. He took 2 steps back and looked at them with a bit of expectation, apprehension, and some fear. At this moment, he didn't have the indifference of using the lives of millions of people as chess pieces, nor did he have the dignity of a high and mighty monarch. He only seemed like an ignorant youth who was not familiar with the affairs of the world. All of his emotions were expressed in his words and on his face. The first to move was his mother. She was the first to accept the memory inputted. The part of the memory seemed to have been digested and absorbed by her brain. She seemed to wake up. She turned around and saw Dean in front of her. She asked in surprise, "Who are you? Where is this place?" "Du Xing, wake up. Annie, you are also here. Great." Under her shaking, his father and sister also woke up. Father Du Xing was relieved to see the mother and daughter safe and sound. He quickly looked around and saw Dean was the only one present. He frowned and said, "Where is this place? Who are you?" Dean looked at them in a daze. This familiar tone, familiar changes in expression, it was so real, as if he was in a dream. "I am Dean." He couldn't help but take a few steps forward. Because he was afraid that the construction would fail, he did not instill the changes of the world in their minds. He also did not change his image in their minds. He said, "Father, I am Dean. I am still alive. The end of the world is coming, but I hid in the freezer and survived." As soon as these words came out, all 3 of them were shocked. They carefully looked at Dean up and down, but found that his eyebrows were vaguely similar to when he was a child, but he looked more handsome. "Are you really Dean?" Father Du Xing was surprised. There were not many people who knew about the freezer. He went against the will of the country and used the research results on his child without authorization, although this child was also one of the research results of their laboratory. Dean nodded repeatedly and said, "Father, now is the post-disaster world. Governments have been destroyed. I listened to your words and built a new home for the survivors. Moreover, I have mastered the technology of the alien monsters and resurrected you." The 3 of them were shocked again. They looked at each other in disbelief. When they saw the different styles of buildings around them, they realized that the situation might be similar to what Dean said. Their memory stopped at the scene when they put Dean into the freezer. Naturally, they knew what kind of disaster the Earth was about to face. But they did not expect that human beings could not resist the disaster, and the governments were destroyed. Du Xing couldn't help but shiver when he thought about the great power that each country had. Even a country with such great power was destroyed. It could be seen how cruel the invading monsters were. However, he was a bit glad and proud to see Dean in front of him. although the world government was destroyed, but the human race was not extinct. As a scientist, although the things Dean said were incredible, he quickly believed Dean's words. "Are you really little Dean?" At this time, the small and lively girl Annie came over with her hands behind her back. She looked up at Dean. In the past, she often looked down at him in the same posture. Dean saw her cute appearance and couldn't help but smile. "Of course, sister, I have grown up, but you have just been resurrected. You are still as small as before. Remember when I was 6 years old, I knocked over the potassium persulfate in the laboratory. It was you who admitted it for me and let Mom scolded me." Annie slightly stared at him and said, "Are you really little Dean?" Dean smiled and reached out to pinch her baby fat little face. "Of course, now I can bully you at will, Humph." This set of techniques was created by Annie to knead Dean's face. She slapped away Dean's hand and angrily returned to Xing's side. "Dad, look. He is bigger than me now. He is bullying me." Xing's heart was completely relaxed as he saw the siblings playing around. He sighed. Originally, the storage was equipped with energy that could be used for about 300 years. I didn't expect that it would appear after 300 years. Moreover, the technology has developed to the point where the dead can be resurrected. It is incredible. Dean, we want to go out and see what the world will look like after 300 years. Dean was very clever. "Yes, father." He took the initiative to lead the way. He pushed the door open for his parents and sister. There was a huge square outside the door. There were many luxurious and distinguished buildings. There were guards everywhere. The commander of the guards was Sergei. He was the new king of the empire. He was too lazy to use his brain and didn't have much ambition. He only liked to play with women. So he asked Dean for a job as a guard. He didn't need to worry about anything. He only needed to patrol the palace and look after it. It was a very leisurely job. With Dean's current strength, it was good that he didn't find trouble with others. Moreover, no one would come to the palace to assassinate him. Sergei was shocked as he saw Dean leading the three out of the study room. He had never seen anyone else enter this room. The three faces were very strange to him, but they had slipped away from his eyes. It was simply terrifying. "Emperor!" Sergei quickly came forward. He was relieved to see that Dean wasn't injured. "Sergei, come and meet my parents. This is my father, Xing." Dean was still immersed in joy. He took the initiative to introduce his parents and sister to Sergei. Sergei was one of the earliest followers of Dean. He naturally knew that Dean's adoptive parents were implicated and died. So were they Dean's biological parents? However, his parents abandoned him and reduced him to an orphanage environment. It was tantamount to murder. It was reasonable to say that there should only be hatred, but Dean's face was full of joy, and it did not seem fake. He had not seen Dean so happy for a long time. Although he was too lazy to think, but it didn't mean that he was stupid. After all, this was Dean's private matter. He scratched his head in embarrassment. "Emperor, how should I address your parents and sister?" He was just a rough warrior of the giant wall of Sylvia. How could he understand the etiquette of the aristocracy? Dean was about to open his mouth, but Xing waved his hand. "Call us by our names. Are you Dean's subordinates? How can you call him Emperor?" Sergei scratched his head. "Master is the Emperor. Naturally we should call him Emperor or His Majesty." "Emperor?" Xing knew that he had heard Emperor instead of Earth. He was startled. He looked at Dean and frowned. "Dean, what's going on? How did you become the Emperor? Did you—" He immediately thought of all kinds of possibilities. For example, Dean had used the chip he had given him to save the survivors. He got the gratitude of the survivors and was crowned as the Emperor by the survivors. Dean could feel his father's displeasure. He suddenly remembered that his father had told him to bring hope to the survivors after the disaster. He had to lead the survivors to live so that humanity wouldn't be extinct. He had achieved such expectations. Ever since he knew about the plans of the demonic insects and the origami, and also the true identity of the survivors in the giant wall, he was even more convinced of this point. Although his hands were stained with blood, and he had killed countless people, the final result was good. If there was no god of Wa, the world would still be under the rule of the origami and the demonic insects. Once either of them created a god, it meant that all life would become slaves. Although he didn't do things in the name of the Savior, but there was no doubt that he had become the Savior of all mankind. As for the dark methods used in the process, it would be completely overshadowed by the glory of the people. What were the people who died compared to the people he had saved? At least the result was the best. Humans wouldn't be extinct. They wouldn't be reduced to slaves. They wouldn't be kept as experimental products. Therefore, he did not let down his father's expectations and trust. "Father, it's a long story, I'll tell you in detail." After thinking it through, Lin Sanjiu, /3_3610/. Chapter 1254. 10 minutes passed, but Noyce still couldn't digest the amazing news that Sergei brought. Dean had found his biological parents? How was that possible? Although it was a short period of time since he became a king, but he was always seizing the time to study to make up for his lack of knowledge. This included searching for the secret history of the giant wall. He wanted to fundamentally understand the operation procedure of the behemoth. The giant wall of Sylvia was the place that he was most familiar with. He wanted to know more about it. He knew that Dean was guilty about the death of his adoptive parent. So he inquired about the relatives of his adoptive parents, including his ancestors. Fortunately, he was able to find some relatives and give some compensation. In addition, he also looked for Dean's biological parents, but didn't get any useful information from the orphanage. Later he knew that Dean's real identity came from the old era 300 years ago. His biological parents naturally came from that era. However, Dean relied on the freezer to survive. His biological parents were just ordinary mortals. How could they resist the erosion of time? "Are you sure that his parents are just ordinary people?" Noyce once again confirmed with Sergei. Sergei replied without hesitation, "Of course. I'm a king now, so I can guarantee that my eyesight is correct. Unless his adoptive parents are also kings, but I'm 100% sure that they aren't. The strange smell on their body can't be covered." Noyce naturally knew that Sergei's eyesight could be trusted. But it made him think of a terrifying thought. If Dean's biological parents were ordinary people, then how did they come back to life? Or how did they appear in Dean's study out of thin air? When he thought of Dean's ability, he couldn't help but tremble in his heart. Dean's power was comparable to that of a god, which was far from being comparable to them. Even if it was a king, as long as Dean was willing, he could create a lot of them at will. Is it really possible to resurrect his relatives? Noyce muttered to himself. When Sergei heard his words, he was stunned. Resurrection? Are you saying that his parents were resurrected by him? How is it possible? Even if he is a god, he can't resurrect the dead? Maybe it is possible if he is a god, Noyce whispered. He didn't say the second half of the sentence. Dean wasn't a true god but a quasi-god. There were only two choices. The first one was to completely copy the memories of the relatives and shape them. The personality of the relatives created by this method was biased towards the subjective thoughts of the creator. It was relatively one-sided, and it was easy to have problems after a long time. The second method was to flip through one's own memories and comb through them from beginning to end. The memories related to the relatives that were to be created were isolated and analyzed from various angles, and according to the actions of the relatives, they would analyze their personalities. Finally, they would summarize a set of personality memories and instill them in. Compared to the first kind of one-sided creation, the second kind was slightly more perfect, but only relatively perfect. After all, No matter how meticulous the personality analysis was, there would inevitably be errors. Moreover, Dean extracted the memories about his parents from his own memory. It meant that before he was born, his parents' childhood experience was completely unknown to him. So naturally, the character that was deduced was not 100% consistent with his own. If it didn't match, then it meant that the creator might not be the original person. Noyce sighed as he thought of this. He couldn't help but feel a bit of fear. He could clearly feel the changes in Dean after Dean unified the imperial capital. This change made him feel inexplicable fear. He knew what he was afraid of. He was afraid of Dean's power. He was afraid of Dean's power. He was afraid of Dean's power. Would you care about life if you could create life at will? Would you care about your loved ones if you could resurrect them at will? Noyce had witnessed too many tragedies of mediocre people. He had seen too many aristocratic families fall. He found that the comedy or tragedy in the world was the most tolerant. No matter how noble a person was, he would feel sad when he lost his beloved son. But he would feel happy when he got what he wanted. It had nothing to do with status, money, or power. An aristocrat would casually spoil silk and satin because he had seen too many of them. It was just like how a lowly commoner would spoil his coarse hemp clothes and not cherish them. Let's go and find the young master. Noyce clenched his teeth. He couldn't continue to see Dean being so paranoid. Perhaps he could wake him up. Even if he had to pay the price of being expelled from the imperial capital and deprived of his power, he wouldn't hesitate to do so. He couldn't watch the youth who had supported and sheltered them lose his mind because of the power. Young master. Sergei was stunned. He was about to remind Noyce that he couldn't continue to use this form of address. But he saw Noyce stride away. That's it. All the survivors have been unified. There won't be any internal strife. We can gradually clean up the monsters on the land. Then we can clean up the monsters in the sea and restore the earth to its original state. Dean whispered to his father Du Xing in the study room. Du Xing and the other two were shocked after listening to Dean's narration. They didn't expect that the world would become so dangerous. The virus created by the demonic insects had turned the entire earth into a devil's den. The most sad part was that humans were enslaved by the demonic insects and the origami. They became experimental materials and fought with each other. I see. You have worked hard over the years. Du Xing sighed. Dean smiled and shook his head. He was about to say something when he frowned. The door of the study room was pushed open. Noyce and Sergei rushed in. Master, I have something to tell you. Noyce took a deep breath and looked straight into Dean's eyes. Dean quietly looked at him. I know what you want to say. You don't have to worry. I haven't changed and I won't change. Noyce looked at Dean's dark eyes. He felt that it was difficult to see through the heart of this familiar person. He was silent for a few seconds. Master, please forgive me. I want to talk to you. Dean stared at him for a long time. He slowly nodded and looked at his parents. I'll be right back. Sister, I'm leaving. Yes. Hurry up. Work is more important. Duan giggled. Dean got up and followed Noyce and Sergei to the main hall. Dean was sitting on the Emperor's throne. He looked at Noyce and Sergei in the spacious hall. His eyes were very calm. Noyce knelt down and looked at Dean. Master, do you remember the first time we met? Dean indifferently replied, Of course I remember. I was framed and sent to Thornflower Prison. Your cell wasn't far from me. There weren't many people who followed me from the prison. Only you and Sergei were in my heart. Noyce's heart was burning, but he quickly calmed down. I'm very touched that young master can still remember this. I once swore to follow young master forever. No matter where you go, I will never betray you. But my ability was humble and I couldn't help master. I could only run errands for you. But now I have been rewarded by you. I have climbed to the clouds and become a king. Dean stared at him. You have saved me and followed me. This is what you deserve. Noyce smiled. Although I'm ashamed, but I didn't think about refusing. It feels good to be a king. I have the power to control the life and death of others. It seems that I don't lack anything." Dean was silent. "It's only now that I understand that when a person has everything, it's also when they lose everything. They might even lose their motivation to live." There was sadness in Noy's eyes as he looked at Dean. "Master, will you feel sorry for us if one day we die in battle?" Sergei was shocked. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Chapter 12:55. You won't die in battle. After a short silence, Dean slowly said, "I will sweep away all the dangers on Earth. You just need to manage the operation of the dynasty for me. Moreover, there are very few things that can kill you with your current strength. As long as you don't fight to the death, then there won't be an accident." Noyce persisted. "What if we die? Will you feel sorry for us?" Sergei anxiously said, "Shut up." "Yes," Dudian flatly said. Noyce didn't expect Dean to answer so decisively. He wanted to ask again but was interrupted by Dean. "I know what you want to say. You are worried that I will lose my mind and forget myself. But you are worrying too much." Dean said in a flat tone, "Power is just a tool for me. I have no interest in ruling the continent or the earth. I won't be influenced by power. My current status won't affect my mentality. You are my friends. Now that you have been conferred noble titles, you may appear to be my subordinates, but in my heart, I still view you as my friends. However, a country is still a country. There are no rules and regulations. The upper echelons are in chaos, the middle will definitely be corrupted, and the lower echelons will suffer. If you are unwilling to live under me, I can give you a piece of land and make you a king." Noyce was stunned. He stared blankly at the young man on the emperor's throne. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out in the end. "Master, you should know that I didn't mean that." He lowered his head. Dean calmly said, "You are the person who knows me the best. Do you think that I can resurrect my parents so I can resurrect you in the future? Are you worried that I won't pay attention to you?" Noyce was startled but didn't answer. Sergei was scared out of his wits. In his mind, Dean was the young master he was loyal to. Dean was a devil who killed without blinking an eye. Now that the world had surrendered to Dean, Noyce had offended him. It was like looking for a crime. You said that you have everything you need, but you have nothing. In fact, you are reminding me that if I gain too much, I will lose too much. For example, emotions. When material needs are satisfied, emotions will inevitably become empty. But this is only a mortal, different from me. Dean indifferently said, "How can I sleep if I don't do it when I have the ability to resurrect my parents? Even though I know that they are not my real parents, at the very least, they are people formed from my parents' memories. I have also thought about whether it is blasphemy to use them to replace my parent. But you don't know how much I miss my parents. Even if I see their replacements, I will be happy." Noyce lowered his head and took a deep breath. He raised his head and said, "Young master, I'm not blaming you for resurrecting your parents. I just think that if a person can satisfy all his desires, he will have no regrets in his life. This will be a terrible thing. He will pursue more and more extreme things. At that time, I'm afraid that you won't be you anymore. So, do you want me to have regrets in my life?" Dudian frowned, his eyes were cold. Noyce slightly gritted his teeth. "Master, I don't mean that. I'm just worried. Your worries are superfluous." Dean coldly snorted. "In this life, people have to work hard to meet their own wishes or desires. There will be no regrets once the desires are satisfied. But in the world of mortals, even if you become the richest person with billions of properties or become the head of state, there will inevitably be things that you can't achieve. There will be regrets that are hard to quell. It is precisely these regrets that cause people to constantly want to become stronger and obtain power. Being weak and oppressed is the motivation to move forward. Do you think it is reasonable for someone to tell you that you should have some regrets when you are finally strong? Noyce slightly opened his mouth as he looked at Dean's cold eyes. He knew that it was difficult to describe in words, but what he was worried about was the feeling that Dean was slowly changing. It was like an old hunter's intuition towards his prey. But how to describe the intuition? How to win people's trust? Noyce fell into silence. He was silent for a long time. He wanted to struggle and try to say something but found that his words were so pale and powerless. He thought that perhaps he was just worrying too much. However, through this conversation, not only did the worry in his heart not lessen, it actually deepened. Noyce didn't know how he got out of the palace. After walking for a long distance, he suddenly turned around and looked at the luxurious palace. He suddenly felt a chill, as if something warm had been taken away from his heart. Perhaps this is the real law of the world? Noyce muttered to himself. There was a bit of sadness and loneliness in his eyes. He thought about the changes he had seen in the imperial capital. He saw all the people living in the giant wall. The refugees were struggling to survive. The nobles were fighting with each other. Everyone was fighting and struggling. They were struggling to get out of the current predicament. They were struggling to climb out of the mud. But what about after getting out of the predicament? It was still a new predicament, a new struggle and struggle. What if all the predicaments were solved? What if there was nothing else that could stump him? Perhaps they would be like the corrupt nobles who indulged in sensual pleasures every night, or like the incapable rulers in history who indulged in wine and beauties. Life would become boring after a long time. He could only endure the years and wait for the time to pass. He would wait for the vitality to be taken away from his body. He would wait for his body to rot and die. He would wait for his mind to stop thinking and completely unload all his strength. What is the purpose of people living? What is the meaning of the eternal life that the demonic insects and the origami are pursuing? Noyce was confused. Perhaps from the moment of birth, people would enter the whirlpool of the bitter sea of the world. They would struggle to move forward, but it would be the sea of bitterness. They would sink if they stayed where they were. If they moved back, where would they find the shore? It turns out that the end of the world is not destruction, but living is the end of the world. Those who struggle hard to survive are the end of the world. Noyce murmured. Suddenly, he burst into laughter. His face was full of loneliness. He turned around and left the square as well as the luxurious palace. He waved his sleeves and walked towards the morning sun. His shadow was getting longer and longer while his body was getting smaller and smaller. Please remember the domain name of this book, mobile version. Chapter 1256. Time flew by. In the blink of an eye, it was the day of the coronation ceremony. The ceremony was held at the giant wall of Sylvia. In the early preparation work, the pioneer area outside the giant wall of Sylvia had been swept clean. Not even a shadow of monsters and zombies could be found. The huge giant wall of Sylvia became a city within the city. It was also the palace where Dean would register and live in the future. Outside the giant wall, a more vast and huge giant wall was built. It was located in the imperial capital, and a large number of aristocratic families moved there. The dark abyss area that once surrounded the giant wall of Sylvia was also dispersed. The terrifying plants in the dangerous Forest of Despair at the border were also burned to ashes by the joint efforts of many kings. Using the giant wall printing technology that the Empire had secretly mastered, it was only a matter of time and materials to print a more magnificent giant wall outside this developed area. It was completed in less than a week. When the new emperor ascended the throne, all the departments and forces of the entire imperial capital were paying attention to and flattering him. They were also busy with this matter. All the work was implemented extremely quickly. At the border of the war god's giant wall of Fire Dragon Country and the Federation, the city gates were opened. Several towering city gates were drilled inside the admirable giant wall of war to facilitate the commercial and trade between the imperial capital and the Federation and the Fire Dragon country. It was also convenient for them to come and visit the new emperor's coronation ceremony. Now the world was one. The imperial capital, the Federation, and the Fire Dragon country hated each other's missionary books were all burned. All the beliefs were unified. Although all this was a bit special for the people at the bottom, the higher-ups always had a way to let the people at the bottom adapt. It was only a matter of time. Bad or good, it was only a matter of a word from the higher-ups. On the day of the ceremony, the world worshiped. The various families, nobles, dukes, marquises, and other leaders who had taken root in the imperial capital personally came to pay homage and congratulate. The 4 major consortiums in the Federation and many warlords also came from thousands of miles away. Many secret families, generals, and ministers in the Fire Dragon country were all present. On that day, spaceships filled the sky, and fighter jets whizzed across the sky like windshield wipers, leaving trails of rainbow-like smoke. Many powerhouses on land rode tamed monsters and stepped into Sylvia. The Federation piloted top-notch mechas like the god of creation and walked over like giant. The powerhouses of Fire Dragon country sat on earth dragons and flying birds, displaying their respective styles and abilities. The rest of the important figures sat in extremely luxurious carriages, surrounded by demonic beast cavalries and beautiful maids. It was an extraordinary scene. Such a grand scene made the original residents of Sylvia's blood boil. They were both shocked and excited. The original residents of Sylvia knew that they were chosen by the world's most respected emperor to become the future capital of the imperial city. The most surprising thing was that the emperor didn't order them to be driven out but allowed them to live in the city. This also meant that they would be the ones closest to the emperor in the future. Just the thought of living under the feet of an emperor filled him with excitement and pride. However, although Dean didn't order to drive out the original residents, but many big figures and big forces of the Federation and the imperial capital had stretched their hands into the giant wall. They used legal means to buy the residences of the original residents. Many of the original residents were surprised by the sky-high prices of these big figures. After all, their vision was limited. They didn't know that even if they increased the price by 10 times or 100 times, they would still be able to sell the residences. The painstakingly managed Ryan family in the outer wall. Now it has become a powerful family in the inner wall. There was no lack of credit from Dean. Although he had cut off the connection with the Ryan family after the death of Old Fuline, but the Ryan family was the place where he used to stay. Other forces would inevitably worry about Dean's thoughts. They wouldn't dare to easily provoke the Ryan family. So it was a smooth journey. No one would stop him from doing business, running casinos, and robbing mineral veins. Dean had become the emperor of the world. Naturally, the big figures in the Federation and the imperial capital had inquired about his resume. They also knew about the Ryan family in Sylvia. So the Ryan family was getting more and more prominent. Even in the imperial capital, they were superior to the real nobles. Their status was comparable to that of a duke or marquis. Ordinary people wouldn't dare to easily provoke the Ryan family if they knew about their relationship with the Ryan family. I didn't expect that there would be countless giant walls outside the giant wall. Our giant wall is just a small city for the entire empire. But now the emperor is Dean, our grandfather of the Ryan family sheltered Dean in the early years. In the future we are bound to have a meteoric rise. Oh my God! Look, such a huge monster is actually a mount. What kind of terrible person is riding it? Don't panic. Our grandfather sheltered Dean. He will definitely repay our family. In the future, he will give each of us one to play with. That's right. The current emperor is under the shadow of our ancestors. Many young masters and young ladies of the Ryan family were standing on top of the castle, looking at the noble banners and carriages erected in the wide street in front of their homes, as well as many strong people riding giant beasts and giant-like mechas. They were so excited that they couldn't help but chatter. Their eyes were full of pride and excitement. Ah! Barton was riding a tamed abyss beast. He was mixed with the crowd as he entered the city. He couldn't help but glance over as he saw the familiar family flag on the castle. He frowned as he remembered that this was the Ryan family where Dean lived. He had listened to the teachings of old Fouline. However, after the death of old Fouline, they had lost contact with each other. You dare to call Dean's name? You're courting death. Barton's eyes flashed. He wasn't a disabled and deformed child in the orphanage. The radiation in his body had been purified. His body was no different from a normal person. Moreover, with the help of Dean, he was the king of thousands of troops. He had conquered many areas in the abyss and killed a large number of monsters. In his view, the help that Dean had given to the Ryan family was something that the Ryan family wouldn't be able to repay in several lifetimes. It was simply unforgivable that these juniors were casually talking about him. He didn't go forward to deal with it. He just looked at them coldly. He would teach them a lesson in the future. It didn't take long for Barton to arrive in front of the Emperor's palace. The newly built Emperor's palace was like a tall building. The square in front of the Emperor's palace was big enough to accommodate 100,000 troops. The stone pillars were carved with dragons and phoenixes. They were hundreds of meters high and looked majestic. So many big shots have come. Barton narrowed his eyes. There were a lot of people who had the same idea as him. The big shots who had arrived earlier stopped outside the Emperor's palace. The convoy stretched for dozens of miles. Many big shots gathered in the square in front of the Emperor's palace. There was a commotion outside as everyone was waiting. Jasaloti and a few other chairmen of the Federation Financial Group heard the commotion and couldn't help but look over. They were a little surprised. They didn't know who had the guts to cause trouble at the coronation ceremony. Soon, everyone saw the source of the commotion. They saw dozens of strange figures appearing outside the square. Some of them had a human's face and a spider's body. Some of them had the body of a cow. Some of them had horns on their head. Some of them were 4 or 5 meters tall. Their arms were huge size. None of them looked like a normal human. The eyes of many big shots lit up as they saw the strange body structure. They recognized that these were undeads. Moreover, they were extremely powerful corpse kings. They had mutated and evolved many times. Their strength wasn't a small matter. In front of these corpse kings was a youth in snow-white clothes. Compared to the corpse kings around him that were 4 to 5 meters tall, he was completely inconspicuous. However, all the corpse kings followed behind him as if he was the leader. Northern Corpse Emperor. He actually came. How is it possible? Did the great emperor subdue the Corpse Empire? Seeing this, the experts were astounded and shocked. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.